evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for all of those that are joining us in person. We've got almost a full house, and thank you for all of those that are joining us on Zoom. I would like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. There will be a special Board of Education meeting on Thursday, January 6th at 7:30 p.m. for the presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget for the 2022-2023 school calendar year. The next regular Board of Education meeting is on Saturday, January 8th at 8:30 a.m. in the board meeting room for review and discussion of the superintendent's proposed budget for the 2022-2023 school year of all responsibility centers. Thank you. My comments will be brief. Just want to, on behalf of the board, wish everyone happy holidays and safe holidays. As we all know, COVID continues to tick up and there's another variant. So let's all continue to be diligent, but let's all make sure we have some downtime, some rest, especially for all our hardworking students. And please, happy holidays from everyone on the board. Also, a big go Blue Wave shout out to Darian High School football for the state championships. That's just awesome news. And then also, we had the Tudor choir and we had the middle school Camisada choir, Alice Theater in Stamford. So congratulations to them. I did not attend, but I heard many people did, and I heard it was awesome. I did get to go to a choir recital at the high school a week or so ago. That was just phenomenal. So as always, we are firing on all cylinders with sports, theater. There was a recent production from our theater group that was incredible in choir. So all good things happening. So again, happy holidays and everyone be safe. With that, Michelle, I will turn it over to public comment. We'll start with our friends in the audience.
Anyone in the first row?
Michelle, do you want to just go over the?
Absolutely. You will have 3 minutes for public comment. Please state your name and address.
Okay. Can I take my mask off or you want me to keep it on?
Mr. Denny.
Unfortunately, you'd have to leave your mask on,
Okay.
but I know it is challenging, so if you could speak as loud as possible, that would be
Okay.
great. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Sheila Quinn and I live on Camp Avenue in Darian. So this afternoon, my daughter got off the bus and she told me that she saw a swastika written on the bus seat. And I don't know, how many times is this going to happen? And I'm kind of wondering, is this a rite of passage? I mean, is this just something that we're going to go, oh, this is such a bad thing. Let's move on to the next thing. Anyway, that isn't actually what I was going to talk about today, but it was upsetting. So what I wanted to say was that I know that this isn't a voting night for Mr. Shelton, but I do want to say that I've seen several emails and some information that's leading me to come tonight to speak. So I'll just do that. ChooseLove.org should be in every school, I think. But the school and what our schools need right now is something a little bit different. It's called DEI. And I'm seeing that this town is thinking about this programming in terms of their own eyes as adults and not through the eyes of children. Has anyone asked the kids what they want and what they need? Can there be a vote at the school? Can we bring it up to the children themselves and talk about it with them? I mean, this is for the kids after all. It's not really for the parents. It's for the kids to be able to go out in the world and understand how to manage and function. I mean, does DHS want to pump out these sheltered, unaware kids into the world to learn DEI somewhere else? Because they're going to learn DEI somewhere else. Why not learn it here? Why not learn it at home? And why not have Darian public school system really model for the country what it can be and what it can look like? So I think we need to give our kids those tools now that they can go out and really use what they learn in our school system instead of in college or at a job. So doesn't really Darian want to model this behavior and want to model this sort of progress that the whole country is kind of going toward Can't we make this happen in a safe, great environment that children actually grow up and they can learn these things and tools? Also, I feel that there's a lot of fear about DEI, and I don't really understand what it is. It's fear of the unknown, I guess. What is so bad about learning about DEI? And who is it going to hurt anyway if they do learn about DEI?
You are almost
It
at
can-
time, just FYI.
It can only help. And that was my last sentence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Who's next? Step up. Thank you.
My name is Roisin Vecchiarelli. I live at 29 Bailey Avenue. My family and I continue to be supportive of the district's efforts in moving forward with the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that you're doing. The students and alumni we've all heard from could not have been more clear about what is needed in our schools. And so we are very appreciative of Dr. Adley and Mr. Tranberg and team and the work that's being done in this regard. So we thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Dr. Abigail Hornstein, and I live at 17 Edmund Street. Tonight, I'm going to speak again about diversity. I'm taking full advantage of the fact that I'm a professor at Wesleyan University, known as Diversity University. And I'm going to begin with an anecdote to illustrate why you need to do a lot more on diversity. When my youngest child was in 4th grade, she came home from school one day and told us that her teacher was Jewish. We asked her why that mattered. And she said, "I did not know that Jews are allowed to teach in this town." In 2017, she thought Jews are not allowed to work for the Darian public school system. That is the impact of representation. Then in fall 2017, a Jew could not be a leader in this town. That is what your curriculum does. When my children were at home from 2011 to 2019, their classes had materials on the Jewish holidays if and only if I prepared them at the expense of my time and my budget. Why is that on the parents? And please understand that that representation extends to dialogues among students. And that is from the perspective of a white child in the system. What about the children who are even less represented among the leaders in this school system? To make my points much more clear, I'm going to quote most of a 16-part thread from a satire account on Twitter called Jew Who Has It All. Trust me, this is better than what I would do. Dear teachers, as some of you may know, if you have any students who identify as Christian in your class, they may be absent while observing the Christian holiday of Christmas. Officially, the holiday commemorates the birth of their prophet. In modern times, the holiday incorporates many pagan winter solstice rituals as well. Some children may believe that a man named Santa Claus, AKA St. Nicholas HaKadosh, will visit their house on a sled pulled by flying deer while they are asleep. As terrifying as this belief sounds, apparently the children really look forward to his home invasion. I'm going to skip a few lines. This is similar to magical Christian beliefs during a spring festival when a magic bunny visits children in the middle of the night to lay colorful chicken eggs in hidden nests throughout their houses or yards. Note, St. Nicholas HaKadosh is obviously a religious figure and must not be incorporated into any public school classroom celebrations. I'm going to skip a few more. Part 11, please do not assume your Christian student will feel comfortable asking questions about Christmas. They may feel uncomfortable being treated as a spokesperson to explain how a bunch of things happen. Let me repeat the gist of that.
You're almost at time.
Do not make a student explain their heritage to others. Good
Thank you.
night.
You're at time.
Yep.
Thank you for your comments.
I feel like not getting much use out there, make it make more sense up here.
Thank you.
Lead by example.
Thank you.
Okay, I am Armel Jacobs. I am at 12 Fitch.
First off, I want to echo what Roisin said. I've heard a lot of calls for a pause and, we need to wait, we need to assess. And I just want to say, it feels like this has been discussed for quite a long time. And we don't really need a pause anymore on something that's been going on for several years. I want to say my family and I are fully in support of moving forward with the plan that was already approved and ready to go. It's, I hear football is a big thing in this town, so I'll just use the quick analogy. You're at the 1 yard line and like, are we really gonna sit there and like fight over if we're gonna run the ball or throw the ball? Like, just get it over into the end zone. Like, we're there already. I also want to share just, I'm speaking off the cuff here, but I do want to share an anecdote like our wonderful professor friend did as well. I went into the school, us COVID parents, we don't get a lot of access. My kid's only 5. So like, this is our first year in the school system. So every time they're like, we're looking for a parent volunteer. I'm like, yes, I'm there. So I went in recently to help set up for their Christmas party. And I'll tell you that a lot of people will say in this town, and I've heard a lot of people say in this town, my kids don't see color. They're only 4, they're only 5. They don't notice that type of thing. It's just not true. All of these kids, and this is before I even went into the classroom, like at Cherry Lawn, everywhere, they have questions. They ask me about my skin. They ask me if my skin means that I celebrate Hanukkah. They ask me if I'm my daughter's mother because her skin is lighter than mine. These kids are searching for context for what it means to be someone with different colored skin in this world because they don't get exposed to it. So please, please help them, give them a framework for thinking about these ideas because they're asking me. And, it shouldn't be, people don't want me telling their kids what this stuff means. Let's all get together and figure out how to move this stuff forward because the kids are asking for it themselves. So that's what I have to say. Thank you guys for everything you've done so far. And I support all the efforts moving forward.
Thank you for your comments this evening. Anyone else from the audience?
Hi, I'm Laura Pesh Gray. I live at 131 Holmes Avenue, District 5. I've always taken pride in our schools and have trusted the Board of Ed to continue with the level of excellence we have known and moved to Darian for. But as the world is changing, so is what's happening in our elementary, middle, and high schools. We definitely need change. We cannot continue on the path of bullying and discrimination. But choosing the right program and having the right person implement this is paramount. I don't support the choice of Ken Shelton. One of Ken Shelton's biggest beliefs and strategies is to eliminate the traditional grading system, which he finds racist and capitalistic. Why would we choose to find this extra money in our budget, which we don't seem to have, to work with someone if we don't plan to implement his fundamental ideas? It doesn't seem like a wise spend of money. There are many other programs such as Choose Love, and I realize to other people's comments that it may not officially be the diversity, equity, and inclusion program, but it's a program that was originated in our state. It's being implemented at the depot. I just would like to know if this program has been considered. It's, as many of you know, it's on behalf of Jesse Lewis, the Newtown first grader killed in 2012 shootings of Sandy Hook. I find it surprising that, given that it's originated here, it's being implemented in our town, why it hasn't been evaluated. And I would love to know if it was evaluated. The formula for Choose Love is courage, gratitude, forgiveness, and compassion in action. There's overwhelming statistics and proven numbers behind this program? Don't we simply just want our kids to be nice, kind, and respectful to everyone, regardless of race, gender, and political position? Choose love, I think, is a wonderful solution to our problem, not Ken Shelton. I also would love to know more about the details. I know that Ken has been with our district and has been working with our district, and there's a lot of vague information behind what has been done and what our plans are moving forward. So maybe some insight into that and how those funds are being spent and how he'll be working with our teachers and would be insightful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Anyone else from the audience? Sure, please come up.
Hi, I'm Diane Urban, 10 Crane Road. I'll just keep it short because I think I have echoed Sheila, Roisin, Armel, and many others in saying that we support moving forward with the board-approved strategic plan on DEI efforts, and don't want to keep pausing. The students themselves have told us that they are waiting for us to move forward. They feel like they haven't been listened to. The students who are affected by these incidents that happen, I think their lived experiences are what we need to be thinking about, not how we as parents are perceiving someone else's experience. So we're supportive of moving forward with the DI efforts as outlined with Ken Shelton. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking. Anyone else in the audience? Sure.
Hi, everybody. Susie Flaherty, 6 Lake Drive. I'm here to echo the support for Ken Shelton and the DEI initiative that's already in place and has been in place for a while. And I'm thinking we have break, we have midterms, and then the school year is going to fly. We need to act now for our children. We need our children to leave the school year knowing that they called you to action, they called us to action, and we responded to them. We can't put this off any longer. These kids need to know that they're supported and that we are going to listen to them and give them what they need now, not in May or not in the spring. We need to do this now for our children. Thank you.
Thank you for coming up and speaking. Anyone else in the audience?
Good evening. My name is Katie Lublin, and I live at 24 Maplewood Drive. I'm speaking tonight as the CDSP Special Education Subcommittee Chair. I would first like to thank Shirley Klein, Scott McCarthy, Kristen O'Reilly, sorry, Kristen, and Laura Straighton, and all of their team members for the annual special education update tonight. The hard work that went into creating it, and all of the hard work that the SES department does every day to make sure that all of our students, including the ones with learning differences, receive the robust education that Darian is known for. Earlier today, I sent an email with a series of detailed questions that my committee and I are still left with after reviewing the slides for tonight's presentation sent out in the meeting materials. Concerns we are hearing from parents surround staffing, both the national teacher shortage and DPS staffing experiencing increasingly high caseloads, literacy, behavior, social skills, and mental health. We expect to see referrals to special education rise as we continue to realize the impact the pandemic leaves on our learners. It's crucial for the district to ensure that we are staffed appropriately and that the staff have the tools and resources they need in order to meet the needs of our students, enabling them all to reach their full potential. In future annual special education updates, we hope to see data on staff caseloads broken out by hour, referrals initiated by staff and initiated by parents, planning for the future, including professional development, new and expanded programs, outcomes for students in special education, and separate annual updates on SRBI, Fitch Academy, and 504 plans. Thank you for your consideration of these requests, and thank you for your dedication to our schools, students, and families.
Thank you, Katie. Anyone else in-house here? Thank you all. Michelle, we'll move to our friends on Zoom.
If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. The facilitator will identify and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Kara Gately, you are unmuted and recognized. You are still muted, Ms. Gately.
Hi, Kara, you're muted. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kara Gately, 596 Hollow Tree Ridge Road. I just want to thank the Board of Education and our administration for taking seriously the mental health and the social and emotional needs of our students, whether they be in special education or in general education across all grade levels, starting at the ELP level, of which I had students go through that program, and all the way up to seniors and those at the Fitch Academy. I think the DEI initiative is very important. However, I've become very concerned with the shift in the focus from cultural awareness and recognizing a need for diversity and a need for inclusion. And it seems to me, in looking at the materials and the professionals that we're looking to bring in, that it has become a social justice initiative, which I think is different than a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative and social emotional learning. So I think I think it's important to keep the focus, especially given the needs that have been expressed by the students who have bravely come forward and the results of the learning of the survey that was done that shows the high percentage of our students with levels of anxiety, depression, and the levels of substance abuse going on in our district, that we keep the focus on social emotional learning and bring in professionals who have professional and academic criteria and credentials in those areas. I think Ken Shelton is an impressive person. He was a UCLA football player. I think that's great. I think he was an educator. I think that really does a lot in connecting with people. But I think there might be others out there, and I can think of some board members from A Better Chance Darian in particular, who have both the professional and academic credentials to really address the very important needs we have in this town, especially given the stakes and given what we know from the surveys and from the studies of the high levels of anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. So I think we really need, as a community, to take a hard look and ensure that we don't just follow trends and go towards social justice initiatives, but stay within what social emotional learning means and a true acceptance of diversity and inclusion. And I think, I really appreciate the time to speak, especially on this 9th anniversary of the tragedy of Sandy Hook, keeping really the focus on kids who are hurting
You're at time, Kara.
and those in need. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Who's speaking?
Peter McGinnis, you are unmuted and recognized.
Are your screens out?
Yep.
It looks like we might have lost them, Michelle.
Oh, I'll go over to Jeff.
Kara, shut it all
Kara hit the wrong button.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for all the volunteers.
Mr. McGinnis, just hold on just a moment. We're having
Of course.
technical difficulties. That's great that we can hear you, but we've lost all our screens. So just pause with us a moment. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Michelle,
Got it.
you can see and guide us?
I can see Mr. McGinnis. I can see everyone on Zoom.
All right, so go ahead.
Mr. McGinnis, you're free to speak.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to all the volunteers on the Board of Ed. I know this is a volunteer job and really appreciate your service. I'm in 22 Robin Hood Lane, and I just wanted to state that I've done quite a bit of independent reading and research, not only on Mr. Shelton's information, as well as listening to some of his podcasts. There are a number of things I hope that the Board of Ed has independently listened to as well, which frankly, if one were not in favor of grades and thought grading and attendance were capitalistic and racist, among other things, I could support them, but I don't subscribe to that. I also do think that with a school budget of $1.9 million in expenditures on guidance and psychologist expenses across the system, I would think that there is enough resources, or should be enough resources. The administration is not new to this school, so I do question why we see so many students come into pain in terms of presentations on some of their experiences. I do think we need to address this issue, but I do think that there are significant resources available. So I do ask, where are the specific cases of bullying in school, or objectionable material found on buses? We need to have in place a complaint escalation process. We need an intervention process. We need peer mediation processes. Have they been established? Where is the established peer support structure where allies can self-identify themselves to support students that might need that support? So I'm not sure any of that's been done. And to go outside the district to a consultant 3,000 miles away that does present so much material that is objectionable, I do really question the motivation here. And I ask the Board of Education to seriously think about this decision, because I do believe Choose Love on this anniversary of this tragic event is a real possible solution and all-encompassing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking this evening.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you. We will have public comment at the end again, so thank you for all those in person and in Zoom. Perfect. We will move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Abbott.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And again, thank you for participating either in person or remotely. I too would like to pass on my congratulations to our football team on their state championship, and to our middle school students and high school students who accompanied Javier Colon. I'm not a big voice person, but Javier was the winner of the first voice competition, and he came from Stratford. So it was, I think he was in awe of our kids as opposed to them being in awe on him. But it was just wonderful to see. And I want to thank him too, because I think he had laryngitis and he stuck through it to allow our students to perform on the stage at the Palace. So we thank him for that. I want to also congratulate Victoria Caruso. Victoria is a 11th grader at the high school, and she, as you may recall, we instituted an elective course, an app development class at the high school. She has taken an independent study with Lorraine Westervelt, who's a teacher of computer science. And she can't fit the class in, but she's doing an independent study on it. She actually won the Congressional App Challenge for Connecticut District 4 by creating an app called Blossom, and it uses the Swift Apple programming language. So this Congressional App Challenge is one of the most prestigious prizes in student computer science. It will be displayed at the Capitol building for a year. And the app itself was designed to track progress towards building healthy habits. I don't know if I can download it just yet or what the status of it. I tried to get it this afternoon, but I'll pass it along as soon as I get it. But we congratulate her on that noteworthy achievement. Thank you to all the parents and teachers who are streaming or doing live concerts and seasonal activities at this particular time. It's just nice to see these come back either live in person or remotely. Staff development this particular week is focused on elementary teachers college, and the focus is on literacy, small group instruction, differentiation, and read aloud, just to name a couple of topics. Thank you to Kathy, who's in the audience this evening and spoke earlier, and to members of the CDSP, especially the Special Education Group, for their recognition of Special Education Day on December 2nd, this past week or so. And it sort of recognized the establishment of the IDEA law back in 1975. I want to thank them for the acknowledgement and appreciation of our wonderful special education support and related services staff. Marilyn Friend is in residence in the district for the yesterday and today, looking at best practices in special design instruction. And she's looking at that as part of the study at the elementary school. She'll be back again for another 2 days in January. Want to recognize also Shirley for the workshop that was held at the high school last week. I know, Mr. Chairman, you attended that. That was a transition workshop for parents, and I know that was very well received. Thank you to our students at the high school for working with the STEM outreach. They participated with 2nd and 4th grade last week in person. 3rd and 5th grade will have an opportunity to participate in April. Last night, the Board of Selectmen approved the Board of Education as a building committee for the Royal Roof project. So we'll get that up and running. Robotics has been up and running both last week and next week. The first classes will start. We had to limit the classes just for the sheer number of supervision and the number of staff that we have trained for it. At the high school, there is not a club at the moment, but we have a number of students who have come forward and will be advocating to start a club on their own. There are a couple of upcoming meetings. I just want to mention them. The facilities meeting, January 13th, policy on the 12th, finance the 20th. So there's a wee bit of space to those, but I just wanted to note those. And of course, the curriculum committee, January 27th. And the budget presentation is on the Thursday when we return, January 6th. The board will get their packets just before the break. And I just want to take this opportunity. In many ways, it's been a very challenging, what seems to be a very ordinary back to school normal year. As some of the comments that you've heard, even it's been anything but that. So I just want to wish all our staff, students, and families season's greetings and a relaxing and happy holiday time.
Thank you, Dr. Abbott. Any board committee reports? Mr. Maroon.
The Facilities Committee met on Thursday, December 9th. We discussed the solar panels, which is item 7D, and the committee recommended to the Board of Education to move this forward pending the attorney's review. We also discussed the libraries reimagined at Tokenique, Middlesex, and Darian High School.
Thank you, Mr. Maroon. Oxbridge, that is a agenda item in terms of the next phase around furniture, fixtures, equipment, and also the technology. So we'll get an update and hear more about that shortly.
And you had a inaugural curriculum committee meeting, right?
Yes, Sarah is out this evening, but we did kick off our curriculum committee meeting. It was a good meeting. Thank you, Mr. Sini. We touched base with Mr. Tranberg. We kind of started kind of at the beginning a little bit with a good overview of kind of the curriculum structure, all the players, and kind of the process that we go through. Also spent some time looking at a new Edu Planet 22 or 21 in terms of technology that will help us organize and track curriculum and also enable not just an internal view, but an external view for parents and students as to kind of the formation of curriculum and what's involved and resources and books, everything associated with it. So we will talk later about a curriculum committee charge, which was developed by the curriculum committee to kind of guide them along with the administration on the work going forward. So thank you. Any other committee reports? No. Good. We will move on. Perspectives on the fiscal 23 budget process. I had a long conversation with Mr. Palin. Hi, Jill.
Do you want to go back and approve the minutes?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Thank you. I missed that. Approval of minutes. Thanks for waiving. May I have a motion to approve the following minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on November 23rd, 2021, and minutes of the regular meeting held on November 23rd, 2021. Mrs. Best and second by Mr. Maroney. All those in favor? That is unanimous with everyone at the table. Are you good, Jill? Thank you. Jill is under the weather, so we thank God for Zoom. So moving along, we wound up with a scheduling conflict. So Mr. Palin and the Board of Finance will come visit us early in the new year from a Board of Finance perspective. So we can move on to the Darian Public Schools update. Dr. Adley.
Thank you. So again, you're very familiar with this. There's a couple of changes since we last spoke, and some changes of process that have been put in place. And obviously, you've heard, as Mr. Chairman has mentioned, the new variant, and there's been an uptake in cases. We continue to meet weekly with our medical team. Today, for surprisingly enough, I'm not sure why, the State Department on Friday issued a notice that there's no meeting today. And that's very, very unusual, right? I'm trying to get a wee sense of what's at the back of that, or if something's on the about to come up as a new strategy or otherwise. But that's very unusual, just to cancel that meeting. The fact that they haven't canceled and they haven't really given a reason to cancel it. So we'll see what comes out of that. Clearly, things have changed since, in a month's time. The state itself is red. The cases in Darian have increased. I will say that even our cases here, if that was Friday, I believe. So the bottom line would really read 46 cases, 40 quarantined, and 30 screen and stay at the moment. Today, for instance, there's 2 staff members at the high school, 1 6th grader. And I will say that we're beginning to see a number of breakthrough cases, people who are fully vaccinated, even people who have a booster shot. So that's just an interesting development. And it still seems to be predominantly attributable to other activities or outside the school for the large most part. We did extend all those distances to 6 feet for the various schools, the elementary schools particularly, because that's where we were seeing the cases. So we did that as a preventative strategy, because that's where we were basically quarantining from, because of the 6 feet at the elementary school. We will have one modification to that at the middle school still with the 6th graders, because they're not fully vaccinated. And we just had to work out a wee bit of coverage arrangement, and that has been done. And so the notice went out on Friday saying we expanded the distance, and we're going to expand it further by going to a 3rd location. So that sort of completes that, and that has been helpful throughout the process. These are just your standard numbers of increase of the town of Darian. You can see for yourself just the numbers where they're played out. And if I just go back, the contact tracing, we conclude contact tracing just about 5 or 5:30 weekdays, and then we resume it again on Monday. I will say that that has worked well, but I would say that we certainly understand the idea that potentially somebody could be in there and a notice may not go just absolutely immediately. We have discussed that with our medical team, and they felt that was reasonable given the level of sickness we're seeing or not seeing, our hospitalizations, low hospitalizations. So they were comfortable enough with that, and so I would be comfortable enough staying with that particular process. It's been helpful. We've jumped on it on Monday morning early. It's also honestly, it's also helpful to our nurses who are literally run ragged with these follow-ups that really aren't matriculating in anything for the most part. So that really was the logic behind it. So that's kind of what we're doing at the moment, and it seems to be working well. The CIAC guidelines, we will be after the break. We will be following the CIAC guidelines, where particularly basketball, ice hockey, indoor track, masks for the most part are not required as long as people are vaccinated. After school, it doesn't apply to. Some of these rules are confusing because It does apply to PE during the day, but it doesn't apply to these competitive. They're carving out, they're saying that the competitive sport in the afternoon after school is more controlled. Okay. I can't, like, honestly, I can't really, yes, to some degree, but medically, I don't know that that's the case. However, we are going along with that. There is some reason to think that they may be going down the line of opening up to the whole discussion about masks. That's not definite by any means, nor has there been a public discussion about that. My antenna is up since there was no meeting this morning, but we'll have to sort of see how that plays out. Given our high vaccination rates and so on, if we had to make a decision, we would make it based on the high vaccination rates that we already know. And for the most part, we know the kids, whether they're vaccinated or whether they're not vaccinated. And if we have to find that out, we can find that out pretty quickly. The safe return plan, that has to be submitted to the state. They have not yet indicated anything for us to do that. But originally, when we, at the start of the year, this was an update that they wanted us to provide. So we'll do that. What does that mean? That just means that the safe return plan that's online right now is just going to be revised. It's revised live. But anything that decisions we have made here or superintendents made or administratively, whether it's contact tracing or quarantine and our screening stay, that will all be reflected in the actual plan itself that has to be submitted to the state. With that, I'll open up if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. Any board questions or comments? Mr. Brown.
Thank you. I guess maybe it's a bit of a comment, but just following up, or maybe a question more to the board, I should say. The comments that were made by the governor last week, I believe, or a week and a half ago, talking about how it's localities in the state have done a great job of making decisions for what should be going on with masks. The fact that I think the current mandate's going to expire in January, and we're not going to meet really until January. I just wanted to throw out, is there any thought on perhaps having a follow-up letter talking about the importance of local control and how much we'd like to be making decisions here for masking going forward?
So I think
that a new decision point.
Yeah, I think it expires, Mr. Brown, in February, so there is a wee bit of time for us. I would, honestly, I think probably what we'll try to do is really get a read behind the scenes a little bit as to what the status of that is. Certainly, it's not going to do any harm to do that if we wanted to reiterate it. But I'd like to get a wee sense behind the scenes, what has happened actually first, or what does that actually mean? I actually sort of alluded that tonight as to what is going on behind the scenes and that, and what they're planning to do. Are they actually planning to give over to local districts that decision-making part? There's some thought that, for instance, the athletic part was the first step in that direction. Whether that's going to happen or not, I really don't know at this point. I'd certainly open up for this. If the board wanted to do something, I'd certainly consider doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Sini.
I mean, I would love to maybe have Alan come back to us in early January and get a better read, after the holidays. I would agree. Maybe it's time to just reiterate that. I just to be clear, the level of illness is pretty, we're not seeing hospitalizations. They're relatively mild still.
Yes, the actual hospitalizations and the nature of the illnesses are still mild cold-like symptoms for the most part.
And then,
but this breakthrough is just a new dynamic.
And then just the distancing that you increased. I realize you're doing it for quarantine purposes, mostly to avoid quarantines at lunch or from exposure at lunch. Is that temporary until we get the younger population vaccinated, or they have a chance to get themselves vaccinated, I should say?
Well, that's obviously the unvaccinated until they're fully vaccinated population. So that's where we were actually quarantining students the most from. So we're trying to alleviate that a little bit. I think it's going to be in place until further notice, until we see a pattern or decisions are made otherwise, or the actual time period expires where the kids are actually fully vaccinated.
Thank you.
So did the meeting that was canceled today, do they have the ability in short order to call another meeting based on statistics, increase in caseload, increase in hospitalizations?
They did.
And then you're moving into another gathering season and traveling season.
Well, they haven't canceled next week's meeting, so that's still on the card. I would say just that this afternoon we mentioned for hockey that if there's a limit at the rink, we'll let that go to that limit, but we are asking people in that cold, cramped environment to wear masks. And I think that's reasonable because people can actually go and see your kids, cheer on the team and stuff. But in that environment, since it's our home game, if we were playing hockey inside, we would ask people to wear masks in the rink. But that's the only restriction.
Any other questions or comments around this? Good. Thank you, Dr. Adley. We will move on to presentation of the furniture, fixture, and equipment FF&E package in budget and the technology and telephone package in budget. There are two meetings coming up starting tomorrow at the Office of Construction Grants and Authority up in Hartford. And it's the next phase in submission for both of these budgets. There was a meeting last week of the Oxbridge Building Committee, and there have been several meetings, sub-meetings. Katie has been a big part of that in terms of the design, the look and the feel of furniture and fixtures and equipment, everything from paint and colors and all that good type of stuff. They've done an incredible job with all of that. Jeff and the team, IT has been very involved, as has Luke. Around the telephone and the IT. Mr. Lynch has been part of this also. So there are literally, I would have to say, almost daily meetings and calls at this point around Ox Ridge in terms of getting to the next phase, which is exciting to furnish it and get it set up for our students to arrive. So we have Amy Samuelson from SLAM to make a quick presentation. There are documents that the building committee has signed and that Dr. Adley and I have to sign to submit to the state. And a lot of this is based on the approval process that the state goes through and is also tied to the reimbursement that we get. So Amy's got a good high-level deck to walk us through this. And Amy, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for welcoming me back to the Board of Ed meeting. You may recall that last month I presented a selection of furniture that will be procured for the Oxbridge School. And this month, I'm looking for approval from this Board of Ed to allow us to bring the documentation to the state of Connecticut for their review. After their review, we'll be allowed to go out to bid and procure the furniture and the technology equipment that includes your smart boards, wireless access points, and network cards. And all of that will be procured and installed in phase one of the completed construction in May of this coming 2022. The remainder of that will be installed in May of 2023 when the phase two construction is completed. Jill, if you're controlling the presentation, you can go to the next slide, or I'm not sure who's controlling that.
We've got it up on our boards, Amy.
Okay, thank you. I could see it in my screen. I just couldn't make it go forward myself. So this is explaining to you the process. We do have meetings tomorrow and Thursday with the state if you approve us moving forward. As mentioned by Mr. Janine, we were able to get approval from the building committee last week with these same documents. And we're moving forward with an on budget, actually below budget technology equipment package. And we were able to gain approval from the building committee to exceed the furniture package slightly in order to furnish all of the spaces, which will allow for 760 students. If you can go to the next slide. So the design capacity of the school is 760. The enrollment, projected high enrollment that the state allows us to look at is 578. And the highest projected enrollment for the school is 694. By procuring enough furniture for slightly over the highest enrollment, that gives the district some room for flexibility moving forward. Next slide, please. This is a list of the furniture and the cost estimate that we've calculated. Once it goes out to bid, we expect that there will be a competitive bid situation and state contract procurement for some of the packages. And these numbers will be proven out, and hopefully the bids will be competitive enough to even bring it in a little below this budget. Next slide. This is the budget and the systems that will be included in the technology equipment package. And this was vetted by Jeff Adams, Dr. Forshaw, and our technology specialists. Next slide. Oh, and so this is just wrapping it up so that you know that within the technology equipment budget, we were almost $300,000 under budget. And for furniture and equipment, we were about almost $400,000 over budget, but the contingency for this very package does allow us to go to bid with the remaining funding. So if we can get approval from your group, we will move forward and bring this to the state.
Thank you, Amy. Real quick, I think I'll summarize it in that I think the building committee, and we had a lot of discussion around this. At the end of the day, if you recall, going back to the very beginning, and the state understood this, you know, there's no room to expand this school once it opens. So for once, if you look back at some of the other projects we've done, we've built in capacity to the school. And I think at the end of the day, that'll be very helpful as we start a renovation project on, how do you really feel about that, Michelle? No. As we start the next 3 renovation projects, it gives us some flex space. And also, if you think about the amount of projects that are coming online shortly, you know, we're going to have some additional conversations about some of these projects and additional increases in enrollment. So I think overall, a lot of discussion at the building committee level, but it makes sense to fully furnish the school. The state will decide on a reimbursement standpoint in terms of their classroom size and max classroom. But Katie, Luke, Mike, and the whole committee, Amy and the whole team there have done a great job presenting this. We're still within budget, even dipping in $100,000 into our contingency budget. And this also incorporates any type of increase or chain issues with procuring this equipment and inflationary costs, and you know, all that's been taken into consideration. So I'll open up to any questions or comments, and then we can move forward with the approvals, which are required by the state. I think I'll just clarify, there are no specific changes to the ed specs that we've been working off of. It's just furnishing and outfitting the classrooms. So I'll pause there. Yes, Mrs. Achman.
My only question would be, has the admin done a full review? So we have adapted furniture and so we feel as if we're meeting the students' needs.
That's Luke and the whole team have been part of every step of the way. We even discussed at the meeting nursing rooms and cots and beds and all that type of stuff. And they made a presentation on the different ability of tables and chairs to move up and down and heights and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I appreciate the committee's work. I guess I'm asking Dr. Adley, you feel from an education standpoint, we're meeting the needs of kids with all this furniture?
Yes, and then the staff from history and practice, it really is important to involve all the staff in that decision making because they have a good viewpoint on that. But yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
No, thank you. Great. So we'll move forward. May I have a motion to approve the submission of the construction documents for furniture, fixtures, and equipment, phase 2 of 3 for state project number 035-0117N, Oxford Elementary School, 395 Mansfield Avenue, Darian, Connecticut, to the Office of School Construction Grants and Review for review at the pre-bid conformance review PCR meeting. Mr. Brown, second by Mr. Maroney. All those in favor, that is unanimous. Jill, with all those folks that are here, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the submission of the construction documents for the technology equipment phase 3 of 3 for state project number 035-0117N, Oxford Elementary School, 395 Mansfield Avenue, Darian, Connecticut, to the Office of School Construction Grants and Review for review at the pre-bid conformance review PCR meeting. May I have a motion, Mrs. Ackman, second by Mr. Brown. All those in favor? Jill, that is unanimous for all people here. Amy, thanks for spending some time with us this evening and appreciate all the hard work on this next phase. And Luke, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, I'll see you at the meeting tomorrow, Amy. Thank you.
Okay, see you in the morning.
We'll move on to presentations and discussions. We have an update and discussion on the Connecticut Green Bank's proposal for the installation of solar panels at Hindley, Holmes, Royal, and Oxridge Elementary Schools. I know this was discussed at length at the facilities meeting. It's also been discussed at a high level previously. So Mr. Lynch and Ms. Basham from the Green Bank.
Yeah, Mr. Lynch is kind enough to be here in person, so I'll let him do the introductions and context and feedback.
Yeah, so as been mentioned, this is kind of the culmination of about 2 years worth of work. Mr. Rudel and myself talking with different vendors, getting some input from Rusty Schreiner from the town, who's very familiar with different solar projects throughout the United States. And so we settled on the Connecticut Green Bank as the this method that seems to offer us the best rate and the best chance of having a successful program. And it was also the only group that didn't really balk at the idea of following around behind us as we re-roofed our buildings. Everybody else just wanted to put solar panels on. They wanted to put them on everything. These people took into consideration our architecture. We didn't want solar panels on the front of this building, the face of it, brand new roof. So they took all those things into consideration, and they've come up with a very good program for you to look at tonight. And I'll turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Mike. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
I see the slides are up. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm Emily Basham, Senior Manager of Partnership Development at the Connecticut Green Bank. And I'm joined by my colleague, Mackie Dykes, who's VP of Financing Programs here at the Green Bank. Thanks for having us. We're here to present the final project proposal for solar projects we've been developing with Darian for the last some time now, maybe a year, at the 4 elementary schools. We were last here at the full board meeting about 6 months ago to present really preliminary project scopes and savings numbers. And with the board's support, we continued on developing those projects since then. And tonight we're here with final figures. Since it's been a while, I'll give a quick refresh of who we are and the solar map program that Darian's been participating in. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague Mackie to review the power purchase agreement and the exciting part of the savings numbers that come with these projects. So the Solar Municipal Assistance Program, or Solar MAP, is a program at the Green Bank, and it's supported by our technical partners at CSW Energy. We both have extensive experience working with municipalities to develop solar PV projects. Next slide, please. The Connecticut Green Bank is a quasi-public state agency. So we were created 10 years ago by the state legislature to use our financing tools to really catalyze and deploy a lot of clean energy. So we've been doing that through our programs and products to help the state meet our energy goals and our climate goals. And through our programs, we work with municipalities quite frequently to install solar projects. And we know that it's a lot of steps, a lot of work to do these types of projects. So we created this solar map program to really simplify those steps and make it easier for towns to adopt solar. Next slide. So this is the solar map program. We are providing technical support for every step of the process. so that towns can use our Green Bank Solar Power Purchase Agreement. Next slide. And this slide just describes sort of the support that we provide, the support that Darian has been participating in the last few months. So we started really with a comprehensive list, a fuller list of all the school sites, looking at those for where are the best candidates. Once we narrowed to the 4 projects we're bringing to you tonight, we really got to work developing those projects, got on site, developed system designs. We've secured the utility incentives for these projects, and we've also run an RFP for a construction partner. You might remember a benefit, a feature of this program is that you're working alongside other Connecticut towns and cities who are going through the program to also install solar. And we are bundling those towns together and those projects together in our RFP. So that allows us to put a larger portfolio of projects out to bid. And we saw great success with that. We received great pricing and were able to deliver really attractive PPA rates this evening. And with that, we go right to the next slide. This shows the towns that we've been working with. Last year was our first round. We worked with 5 towns to develop 15 projects. Those projects delivered savings between 20 and 50%. So our power purchase agreement provided discounted solar electricity from your utility electricity. And this round, Darian joins 9 other towns for 26 projects. And these projects are receiving on average a 33% discount to the utility rate. Next slide. There's a lot on here. It just shows sort of the milestones that we've achieved and pulling these projects together. We're right here at the bottom presenting the final projects to you all to execute a power purchase agreement and then start construction in 2022. I believe the next slide is a list of towns that we've done a power purchase agreement with, either on a municipal building or a Board of Ed building. Power purchase agreement is a very attractive pathway for going solar for towns and cities. And I'll hand it over to Mackie to sort of dive into a power purchase agreement and describe the features of that.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for allowing us to join the meeting. Again, this is Mackie Dykes, Vice President of Financing Programs at the Green Bank. I believe we talked about a PPA, a power purchase agreement, the last time we were here. So I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll try to move through it a little more quickly. But of course, if questions or I'm moving too fast, please interrupt me. Next slide, please. And then one more. Yep. So this is a structure where, and this is sort of the culmination of all the work. This is the actual agreement between us, the Green Bank, and the BOE to make these projects happen. And instead of you going and purchasing a solar system or hiring someone to build it for you, you're instead signing this agreement to purchase, as the name implies, purchase the power from us. We'll actually be the owner of the system, and you'll purchase the power from it from us. Next slide. The primary benefit with this is the savings that you see from that, because the power from the solar will be cheaper than the power you would have purchased from the utility. So now you're paying an energy bill to Eversource. Afterwards, you'll still pay an energy bill to Eversource. It'll just be a lot less because you're not buying as much power from them. You'll be paying us a bill for the green power from the solar system, but together, those two will add up to less than what you're paying now. Next slide. There are numerous other benefits. The fact that we own the system, so we're responsible for all the O&M, the lack of any upfront or ongoing costs to you, So you're able to go solar with no money up front, and you start saving money from the beginning because, again, your electric, the solar PPA rate will be cheaper than your utility rate, and you're locking that lower rate in for the full 20-year term of our agreement. So as utility prices, as we would anticipate, will rise as they historically have for decades, you'll be sort of cushioned from that to a certain degree by the firm locked-in power rate that you have. We're also able to monetize a lot of the federal tax benefits and pass those on to you, which you just can't since you don't pay taxes. Next slide. So again, sorry for rushing through that, but just want to get to the actual project. So last time we were here, we talked about some of the details of these, but we were missing the key thing, which was what is the actual PPA rate that we can offer you? What are the actual savings? We did some estimates, very conservative estimates about what we thought we could do. We've actually, as Emily mentioned, we ran the RFP. We have a Connecticut-based installer, or excuse me, we have an installer to install these. We have a price, and we've used that to calculate a PPA rate, which has resulted in fairly significant savings and much more than we'd initially estimated. So actually can't see the.
Hey, Mackie, could we scroll through? I think the visual is good so everyone can see aesthetically. And then I think slide 18 does a good job of summing this up.
Great. Yeah, let's just do that then. I think y'all are.
We've got 18 in front of us.
There we go. Okay, I can see it now. Yep. So all in, you're looking at discounts between 37% and the greatest at 60%. Again, I won't read all the numbers to you, but very pleased with overall over the term, we're saving over just over 1.1 million. And we're using fairly conservative estimates about power escalations there. And then you see all the environmental benefits that accrue from these projects. So I'll pause there for any questions or comments. Otherwise, I'm happy to move on to what the next steps would be.
Yeah, that's a good place to pause, Mackie. Thank you. I'll open it up to any board questions or comments. Yes, Mr. Sini.
Mackie, could you just comment on the Oxford assumption? We discussed it in the facilities meeting, but I think it's important to know that you put a pretty conservative assumption out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can jump in and speak to that.
Please do.
I don't know if you can see it, Mackie, but the Oxbridge Elementary School doesn't have an established utility rate quite yet, so we put a placeholder in. We used the lowest of the electricity rates that are at the other schools to come up with the most conservative estimate of savings for what this project would generate. So with a 4.8 cent PPA rate, we're confident that the discount would be at minimum 55%. So you're seeing the corresponding savings numbers for that figure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Senior. Any other questions or comments about the proposal, the rates? You want to move on to quick, Mackie, on next steps?
Yes. So the next steps would be to actually execute the agreements, the PPAs for these projects. Typically, we work directly with BOE staff on that. They're fairly lengthy legal documents, so we work with directly with staff and counsel to review those and negotiate those. But again, it's reflecting sort of the project details and the rates and savings that we've talked about here. So yeah, we sign those really, and then we get the project started. There's a fairly lengthy amount of sort of desk work that has to happen. The full engineering of the system. We're coming in, with the structural engineer and doing assessments of the properties, permitting and all that. And then later in the year, we would expect to actually begin construction on the projects.
Great, thank you. Any further questions on the timeline? Yes, Mrs. Ackman.
Just one quick question, Mackie. In terms of servicing the solar panels, in terms of if there's a problem, and I'm sorry if this was covered in facilities and I missed it, who's responsible for that? What do we do if there's a problem? What's the district's kind of liability?
If there's any, you mean problems in terms of just the operation of the panels?
Yeah.
Or, yes, okay. So any issues with the performance of the panels is our liability or our obligation to correct. We're monitoring those systems remotely and comparing what we expect it to produce to what it actually is. So if we see issues there, or if we see no production, then we're probably going to catch it before you are, and we'll have a contact. For part of the contract will be for y'all to give us a contact for each school. We'll reach out to them to coordinate a site visit as soon as we can. You'll also, we do a sort of once the project's done, a kickoff meeting, so you'll have our contact info. So if you notice something or notice any problems, you can reach out to us. And we're also doing at least once a year, just, preventive maintenance visits, which we coordinate with whoever our appropriate contact is. But I guess bottom line, any performance issues, equipment issues, anything, that's our responsibility and our cost. And because we don't get paid unless we're producing power and selling that to you, we have every incentive to make sure that it's operating to the expected level.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Brown.
Follow-up question on liability, and then also a follow-up. I thought there was a question last time about the town and who owns the building, and if we can put the stuff up there, and do we need to coordinate with them? I don't know if we have an answer to that yet, or if that's in the works with staff. And then to Mrs. Ackman's liability question, just thinking up a hypo, if we have one of these panels blows off the roof, knocks little Timmy off the jungle gym, and he chips a tooth, who's in trouble? Who has the liability on that?
I'll have to.
You can come back to me. If
Yeah,
you
I'll have to
top
come
your-
back on that. I don't know the answer to that specific situation.
So good, you understand the takeaway.
Yeah, I'm just trying to illustrate the point is who has liability for if this stuff comes loose or, there's physical issues with it.
And that's part of my question. I appreciate Mr. Brown's hypothetical because servicing is great. And then in terms of liability installation, I assume you'll cover with the lawyers and everything as you do contracts that, installation being done properly and all that, the district would be free of liability.
Yes.
That's where I was going. Thank
Mr.
you.
Lynch, my understanding is as we have care, custody, and control over these buildings, I'm not sure what involvement town hall has. Have we clarified that yet?
No, that has not been specifically clarified. If the first selectman signs the actual document as the property owner.
Okay. I mean, we have solar on these buildings now.
Yeah, we have
so-
solar at
Yeah.
Ox Ridge and at the high school.
Yep.
And,
Good.
it's similar to power purchase agreement from 2009.
Okay. So we'll get those good questions answered. So, good. Thank you. Well, thank you both for joining us. Any other board questions or comments around this? Shout out to, I know Luke's been part of this. Shout out to Mike Lynch and his team, and Rusty Schreiner has dedicated a lot of his time over and above Ox Ridge in helping out with looking at this and providing some introduction. So again, kind of a good team effort. All right. Yes, Dr. Adley.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, it would be our intent to bring back the PPA agreement once it's reviewed by council to hear.
Thank you. Yeah, there's no action this evening. Good. Thank you both for joining us this evening. We appreciate it. Mr. Lynch, thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marky. Thank you. Emily, thank you.
Thank you all.
We will move on to the special education update. Mrs. Klein, and I see a lot of the team online there, so I'm sure we'll hear from a few people. So I'll turn it over to you, Mrs. Klein. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. John?
Yes.
Firstly, if I may, you're able to hear this, right? First of all, good evening. If I may, just before I begin, Dr. Adley, you were kind enough to acknowledge me before in terms of the presentation on the transition program we had for from post-secondary to 18 to 22-year-olds. I really wanted to give credit to Dr. Scott McCarthy, to Christina Brass-Taylor, Eileen Whalen, Sam Partner, our new social worker in the high school, who really put together a program, as many of you know, we've been working for years to try to really reach out to agencies and support for families. So I just wanted to acknowledge them for all their great work.
Thank you, Mrs. Clark.
I just want to start good evening to members of the Board of Education, to the families, to students and colleagues. Every year we thank you for this opportunity to come before you just to give you some updates and overview of our current practices and some of our programs in special education. Here with us this evening on our via Zoom, are our program directors. I'll begin with our youngest learners. Laura Straighton is there, our program director for ELP. Kristen O'Reilly, our program director for K through 5, and Scott McCarthy, our program director for secondary education for Middlesex and for DHS. Thank you all for joining us this evening. After I go through a brief presentation, they're all present for questions you might have for more detail on some of our programs. So thank you. And thank you to CDSP for a follow-up also on some of the questions and all the work you've worked with us this year as well. Thank you. So if I can start with, and Chris is kind enough, just for your information, the department structure, just to know who we are. I've made those introductions tonight, but I just wanted to acknowledge also we have department chairs in Middlesex, which is Teresa Fox, and we have Christina Brass-Taylor in our high school to support all of our programs as well. For the program overview, and you'll see it's consistent pre-K through 12, and the reason for that is we want to make sure that our students, as they go through our programs, have a continuum of services that really support them at different developmental stages as they go through elementary, middle, and high school. So to start with, going from different tiers of levels of instruction, when we look at one of the most integrated opportunities are for our general education and students who are for special education students who are in general education classes and receive related services only. So there may be a child who only receives speech and language service as a related service, and the rest of their time is spent in the general education classroom. The next tier that you look at is what we refer to as supplemental services within the general education classroom. So currently in our ELP program, which is the most integrated program, our students are there throughout the day. In elementary, in K through 5, there are special education teachers who, which is recommended by the PPT, will push into a general education classroom to provide supplemental services. And in middle school and in the high school, we have co-taught classes in English language arts as well as mathematics. Is this loud enough? Because it's not sounding like it.
Yeah, you're fine.
Fine. So if you look on the next tier, and again, the tiers change as PPTs recommend that students require more services. And when you look at that, very often they might have to be pulled out for services. And those services we look at as supplemental services that are provided by a special education teacher. In elementary school and middle school, we call them resource rooms. And in DHS, we usually use the Learning Center as the description of those programs. Those are programs that are taught by a special education teacher. They supplement instruction from the general education class, but they're more direct instruction in a separate environment. Also on those supplemental services, we have in our Middlesex program, we have the AIM program. In the past, that really is students are spending the majority of their day in general education classes, yet they have a home base to go to for a learning center or for a teacher that's there because they may need some support throughout the school day. That program goes into our DHS program and its core there. And again, students are in general education classes throughout the day. They'll have a learning center and core, but again, if they need to come in and get some support from a special education teacher, they're there throughout the day. Those programs also have a community component to it, as well as a therapeutic support to it. And then we move on again to students who might require a higher level of support. We do have modified classes. Our modified classes on middle school are in the ALC program, and in the high school are comprehensive classes. The ALC programs are small classes taught by a special education teacher in the content area. In high school, because the level of support that we require are our comprehensive classes, those are taught in the core subjects by a duly certified special education teacher who's also certified in the content area. That said, there are times that we may not have a teacher who's duly certified. In order to comply with what our recommendation is, we would have a content teacher in that classroom as well. That has happened more often in science. It's hard to have a duly certified teacher in science, so we've had to do that in the past years. And lastly, our specialized programs, and again, to make sure that we have a continuum when kids enter our programs in kindergarten and to support them if they require that same level of support. We have our DLC programs in the elementary school. Currently, they're housed at Hindley and Oxbridge. We have our ALC programs in Middlesex, and we have our Excel program in the high school. The emphasis there also, in addition to academic support and social emotional learning, is a vocational component, and you'll see as we go through our presentation of how we provide that opportunity. And most importantly, in this conversation has come up over the years of our post-secondary programs. So within our own DHS, we have programs that really support and prepare students for vocational or for other work activities. What we finally have been able to really do in our Excel program is really align ourselves with agencies and other local opportunities for post-secondary, whether it's Norwalk Community College or Ableist, we have opportunities, or neighborhood programs for post-secondary to make sure our students are really prepared for that transition to post-secondary pathways. And the early learning program overview, as you can see, I won't go through the same opportunities because it all fits in the continuum. But we look at our ELP program with 16-hour programs, 20-hour programs, and 22.5-hour programs. All of those are determined at the PPT. And again, the level of service is really designed by the multidisciplinary team that really requires that understanding of how can we implement the goals and objectives and what services do those students need. Our updates and highlights, we're continuing with Margie Gillis still. We're excited to still work with Margie Gillis and looking at really phonology, looking at pre-dyslexic understanding of how children read. And this year, we've worked in collaboration with Julie Droller and Katie, as well as Chris, on really implementing the Hegarty program, which really looks at phonology in a very systematic way. It's actually being implemented in ELP, in kindergarten, in SRBI, and in some of our special education programs. Hegarty has, again, multisensory, scientifically research-based instruction that students have been very responsive to, and we're excited about rolling it out this year. We look at mathematics, again, everyday math is what we're using. And if you look at the framework, one thing to keep in mind as we go through all of these is we've had the conversation of special education should be supplemental. Children still need to access the same curriculum that all of our general education students are accessing. So when we look at the different programs that we use, the different fields we're going into, they're consistent with their peers in general ed. And it's just how do we have SDI to really support them. Social emotional, but keeping the same thing, zones of regulations, our responsive classroom. We continue with Michelle Garcia Winner's programs on social thinking, which are some of the most effective ways to our social groups. And we're doing that throughout elementary, middle, and high school. Our paraprofessionals continue to be trained in RBT and PMT to make sure that we have safe, de-escalating manners to really address behaviors, as well as some of the higher level supports for students. Instructional technology, it's our responsibility to continue to train all our speech and language pathologists. We've trained them in devices, augmented devices, and we continue to learn from other contracted service providers as well. Connected Dots is essential. It's part of Laura's program and how we really measure success for all students in her program. And it's been rolled out for 3 years now and been very successful. Elementary program overview, again, the same continuum of services from supplemental to specialized, our planning and placement teams. I just want to highlight that the reason we've asked Dr. Marilyn Friend to join us is we really want to ensure that how we meet the needs of all our students. Do they need to be out of the classroom in terms of services we're providing? And what's the best way to make sure that we support their goals and objectives? So when we look at our supplemental and we look at our resource programs, we look at our DLC programs at the end of this year, somewhere around May, hopefully, Dr. Friend will come and we'll share our results of what our self-study is. Our literacy program is always multi-sensory, so we continue to train our staff in OG, Wilson, we use Spire, we use V&V, we use Seeing Stars, and of course, we're introducing Hegarty this year. Our math, we use the same, all the materials and attributes of our math programs. For language, we continue to make sure, as I said, that everyone is trained in that. The same areas of social emotional assessment training is a little bit different on these levels. It is our responsibility and requirement to implement new assessments as they come available. So this year we trained everyone on the WIAT-4, on RAML and ADOS, which are achievement tests, memory tests, and tests for autism. Our self-study, again, Dr. Friend will be here back. She was here November 2nd. She was here yesterday and today. She'll be back in January 24th and 25th. Parent coffees, as you can see, continue to be part of our most essential way of relating and sharing with families, and we continue them in all of our schools, elementary, middle, and the high school. And lastly, not lastly, most importantly, you were kind enough to really support the assistant principals, and as we go through the year, we'll speak more to that. But what we do want to share is they started off from day one in this robust manner of saying, we're here to improve teaching and learning. We're here to really look at what SDI looks like in your classrooms. The evaluation process, the supervision process, all of that is designed to really support that level of instruction. And the overarching theme, which we said, which was, special education is not a place where children should go. It is access to the curriculum in the general education class, and what can we do to work in tandem with our general education teachers and the curriculum that's going on in the classroom. So that has been their charge. They've been doing it in PLCs, they've been doing it in evaluations, they've been doing it in supervision, they've been doing it in coffees and parent coffees, and they've been doing it in PLCs. So the excitement of having them there has already changed, and I know it doesn't seem like a short period of time, but it is since September, of the way we're beginning to see our special education teachers designing instruction. So we appreciate greatly the access to having those APs, and we'll continue to report out. And of course, excitingly, at the end of our elementary part of the presentation is the notion of when Oxford Elementary School does open, the opportunity that we'll have for two things. One, for our ELP population, we've wanted to be one site, one community for the last 7 years, and that really will be happening. Two, for the idea of our DLC program, because when you have specialized programs and can put your students, your K-5 students in one community, you have a different opportunity for different related service providers. You have a hub where you have OT, SLPs, PTs, ABA specialists, BCBA specialists, and special education teachers really designing a program for those students K-5. We realize that it won't be year one necessarily, but we are going to start working with families, working with staff, working with our related service providers to begin to build that DLC capacity to get back into the school. I did want to comment on Mrs. Ackerman's question about furnishings. So very often, many of our students will have specific adaptive equipment, furnishings, and that's really recommended at the PPT level. So we provide that. And very often that will travel with them throughout school. So that's not in the original plan of furniture, but we're on that. So just so you know, that will be kind of it. Equipment follows students. So when a PPT recommends equipment, it follows the student throughout their educational career. It does change as students grow. And as far as the transition, I know Luke has spoken to that, looking at the FFE, we've considered that also, because our rooms do have to have certain requirements also for many of our specialized learning. Sink areas, bathroom areas, that's all been done in the design. So again, thank you for everyone's commitment to making sure that we had a safe environment.
Mrs. Klein, if I could just add, and I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but the ELP space on that side of the building will also be used as transition space for the cafeteria and for kind of meeting and gymnasium type space. So again, the capacity we built in the school will help with the phasing of it, and that we will not have a cafeteria when we open or a gymnasium. So there's a very detailed plan that Luke was part of, as was the rest of the school. I believe Katie was part of that too, as to we know the classrooms we need, and then we'll have some movement around in terms of lunch space and kind of play space.
Thank you, Mr. Denny. We also consider equipment for playground also when we were looking at that. Luke's actually done that in Oxbridge prior to this, also for accommodating students. So that's been a consideration also to make sure it's accessible for non-ambulatory students or students who have different physical needs for equipment. When we come to middle school, again, you have the same continuum of services. This describes in at your time, you can look at it. Just to keep in mind also that we do have 3 speech and language pathologists in the middle school. We have 3 school psychologists, and we have 1 social worker. So as we know that, over the last 2 years, in terms of challenges of really addressing the mental health needs of all of our students, having a robust clinical staff has really helped to support them during our time, and our staff. We also have 6 school counselors in Middlesex. So again, those are resources that really can address all of our students' needs. As far as our co-taught classrooms, we spoke to that. We spoke to the AIM program, and we spoke to our learning centers. The one thing to keep in mind also, again, in terms of our ALC, is again, we begin to have that nexus between middle school and high school. We have a little cafe in middle school now also that our students have designed and are working. So we make sure that we're vigilant about giving them opportunities to really be part of the community and making sure that they're really designing exciting vocational ideas. Our program highlights consider, again, multisensory reading, going through that. I think the one area that's different in our instructional focus in middle school as well as high school is really looking at ongoing refining of co-teaching implementation. What our focus is making sure that with all the work, Marilyn Friend's been with us 3 years with DHS and 2 years at Middlesex, but making sure that we just don't stop. New staff has to get trained, new administrators have to get trained, and making sure that we're really monitoring and supporting our co-teaching methodologies. Focus on mini lessons continues also to be part of our middle school scope and focus. Our parent coffee series is again essential. They're posted. We have actually finally gotten our website to really be more accessible and have more connections. So all of those parent coffee series have opportunities for being posted and are available. We've been using Zoom as our platform, and that's been very helpful. More parents have been able to attend. And we've been excited about having both mother and fathers and different parents and guardians able to access that throughout the year. The next series to look for is our Articulation Series, and that will be coming up for 5th to 6th grade. Many of you are familiar with that, and that will be our next series. In Darian High School, again, looking for our highlights, same continuum of services that we ensure, focusing again on our transitional opportunities for post-secondary as well, and learning a lot about assistive technology. So the idea of really having assistive technology so our students can become more independent and making sure they use those devices for that purpose, and they can do that. So we have a strong emphasis on that as well. And our parent coffee series continues there. One of our most popular ones are Did You Know? That's already been completed this year. In all of our, we'll speak later to it when I get to that slide also, is that there will be a new IEP being rolled out as of July 1 of 22 Connecticut Seeds, so we'll be speaking to that also, and we will be rolling out parent training for that in the spring as well, consistent with the rollout from the Connecticut State Department of Education. We're looking forward to 8th to 9th articulation PPT workshops that will be coming up shortly also in our parent coffees. Unified sports will continue and best buddies. And we're also looking at opportunities for rolling one out in the middle school, and we'll keep you posted and updated on that as well. And lastly, on Connecticut Seeds, IP Direct is something everyone's become familiar with, and whenever a state shifts over to an entire new operation system, there's a great deal of training that's involved. Kristen has really worked strongly with the Connecticut State Department of Education. Our new APs are really rolling it out in their respective buildings in the elementary school. Our chairpersons in secondary will be doing it alongside the program directors as well. There is a schedule that comes from the state. We are not one of the piloted districts, but we will be required to begin to roll it out in July. Superintendents participated in a workshop also to be informed, so we'll keep you updated as we're updated, but know that it's ongoing training, and as the state provides it for us, we participate. There's actually every Monday afternoon, there is a phone-in time that we can use, and that's been consistent since the beginning of the year for ongoing help. Just so you know, there was an error. It wasn't really 805, it was 804 students last year. There's one off in the CDAC. So when you look at the numbers, just know that it was really 804 students. As you can see that we are up to 873 students. Just keep in mind that CDAC is October 1 to October 1. So that's not what it looks like by the end of the year. You can see that 804 was very flat. It was during the time of COVID. There weren't as many opportunities for evaluations initially. So we know that was flat for last year, but we are 873 students. So you can see a significant increase of 69 students across the district. The prevalence in special education, which does change based on that, you can see it continues to be speech and language as one of the overarching prevalence, as well as other health impairment. Learning disability is also your third, and then you can look at the other areas that really have remained pretty much the same. And of course, there's a glossary of acronyms every year, just for new families also who are not familiar with it, to be comfortable knowing about some of the language that we use, and it is statewide and very often nationwide. And our program directors are here also for any questions that you might have in any of the areas we discussed tonight. Thank you again for all your support and your continuation support, and all of the families and students and colleagues for all that you do every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein, and thank you to the team. I know it's a collaborative effort to put all this information together, so thank you for the overviews. Mrs. Klein, I'll just start out with a real quick question on CT SEDS. Since we're in budget season, is there a cost associated with that? And it seems like, is it a project? And you may not have the answer now, but it'd be nice to understand, are there resources that you need to implement it well while doing your day job? So just kind of that thought process. It scares me that it's coming from the state, as do all these things, but like, let's make sure you have what you need from a resource standpoint, and of course the dollars.
So on an individual school level, the state informed us that they're going to give a small stipend. We can have 2 people in each building, and they will give a small stipend to support that. That said, it's a small stipend to support that. We're already working with Kristen's arranged with the assistant principals in the elementary school to do it. Scott's working with the chairpersons. So I think we're okay on enrolling out. The real challenge is going to be taking all of that data that we currently have in IEP Direct and downloading it. And when they speak about it, it's a little bit nerve-wracking of like, we're just going to take all this data and put it there. What's going to happen to it? I think they're saying that Frontline, which is, we've already, and Rich can speak to that, we already pay for Frontline, which runs the operation. That's dollars we've already spent. So we'll be continuing to use that. And they kind of speak to each other, the new system and Frontline. So we're hoping that will be it. We do pay IEP Direct. So hopefully the dollars that are allocated to that will be able to use that. But I will continue to reach out to the state and inform Rich of what we may need to do. But right now, I think that's our understanding.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein. I will open it up to further board questions and comments. Mrs. McCammon.
Staying on the topic of SEDS to start, is there a reason that the state is mandating that change? Is there a change? Is this just a switch of technology, or is there something that the state is trying to do differently? Are the goals differently structured? Is there an educational reason for this change?
So the goal is really wonderful, Ms. McCann. The goal is that, look at this, every student will have a drawer. So they'll have a drawer, and in that drawer will be SRBI, will be RTI, will be AIMSWeb, will be everything that belongs to that student. It'll tell the story of the student. In addition to that, it will crosswalk with Medicaid, it'll crosswalk with other systems, it will crosswalk with SBAC. It will eliminate a lot of the state reporting that happens now. In other words, CDAC will not, you won't be seeing CDAC. That will all be part in one large repository. So the notion of it, and there is a new IP. The IP will look different, and that'll be training also. It's similar to what we have, but it's supposed to be friendlier and have a stronger parent voice. So the notion is that it will be a much friendlier system, more accurate reporting. And in the long run, once we have the first PPTs in 22, 23, we'll begin to roll everything into that data system, and you'll be able to have a much more cohesive student drawer and be able to access that. There also will be a parent portal. So that will have a piece also.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Other board questions, comment? Mrs. Ackman.
Wonderful. I'm coming from the state. Such an interesting idea. Well, I mean, I think we say like, I'm scared of it because it's coming from the state. IEP direct came from the state. State came in and like helped us fix special education. We have to be careful about stuff like that. Can we talk about, we have 69 extra students, or sorry, that's the wrong way. Extra, we have 69 more students that are utilizing special education. Can we talk a little bit about caseloads? Are we within our best practices for caseloads? Do we have areas that we're stressing that we should know that we might need more providers, or are we meeting kids' needs? Just kind of give me a perspective, knowing that we have more students than maybe we could have anticipated.
So yes, we have additional 69 students. And yes, I'd say, and we certainly will look at it, our high school right now. So we're looking at 24 more students in the high school. The high school was already very large in terms of numbers of caseloads for our practitioners to begin with. We've been able to support them this year by being creative and doing that, but we will, when we come to support and speak to the superintendent's budget, look at some additional staffing that might be required. As far as middle school and as far as elementary school, we're looking at our aging out, so our articulating fifth graders that are coming out, so our numbers look like they'll be manageable on the elementary school and middle school as well.
And are we seeing, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, go ahead.
So often what we do is when we look at how many of our ELP kids are coming in and how many of our fifth graders going out, that's really how we really balance our caseloads.
And I know each child's needs are individual, but are we seeing any generalized needs? You know, it's hitting more one bucket than another in terms of new identifications, or is it very generalized and based on very much individual experience?
I think the social emotional needs as a result in terms of the wake of COVID is where we're seeing a lot more needs, especially with some needs where some students, when they were absent from school and not involved in some way, it assuaged some challenges that students might have had. If you've got social anxiety and you're not coming to school, your social anxiety will be reduced. And then when you return to school, you see a higher level of support and need. So we're monitoring that also. And again, we'll speak to that at the superintendent's budget meeting. But I think that would be the one area that we saw the most. I think all of our interventions, because of our emphasis on reading instruction in elementary, which is really what we're looking at dyslexic behaviors, looking at early identification, looking at ways of how we've trained our staff for Wilson and trained our staff for other multisensory. I think we're able to address it, and we're just going to continue having a really strong PD on that level.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Sorry, I just want clarification from Ms. Ackman's question. So you mentioned we have 69 additional in the overall system, but there's 24 of those are in the high school. What was the starting number in the high school, just to know the ratio?
The starting number,
So 24 additional, how many, just on a base of how many?
I'm glad you asked.
You can come back to me, Cheryl.
I got those. I actually have them by heart, because I know it was 804 to 816, but I don't have the exact number of the high school, so give me a moment. There it is. So we started with, on 2021, October 1 to October 1, is that okay? We had 254 in the high school, now we have 278.
All right, so it's 254 plus 24 is addition, so it's about a 10, just under 10% difference, which is about the same, it was like a 9 and change for the entire population, so pretty close. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other questions or comments or thoughts? Mrs. McCammon?
Staying on the chart with the numbers of students. So looking at the 1 year change, that is pretty significant, but looking at that 5 year trend, it's also a pretty big growth. Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing on the 5 year trend? Because that isn't as explainable by the last year.
It's consistent with the Connecticut, with the trend that's in many districts. Ms. McCann, just so you know, we've seen that trend, and when we compare ourselves to other districts also, we're higher, but it's certainly that has been the trend. I think it's many things have happened, and we've spoken to that. One, identification. We've improved our way of really assessing students. I think we've improved our way of really looking at students diagnostically, both formally and informally. So that may be part of it. There's also numbers that have really changed. If you look at the autism numbers right now, and it's 1 in 44, and if you would have had this conversation with us 5 years ago, it was 1 in 80. So I think a lot of trends have changed also in terms of identification. Now, again, the number increase in looking at autism spectrum disorder is because, again, tools and assessments, we have to really make those determinations. So I think both things have occurred. I think identification, I think the band of how we measure different learning differences has changed as well, and our tools in doing it.
So building on that, given that I would think that as we move forward, we only get better at identifying learning differerences.
Yes.
Do we see this number continuing to grow, or how are we looking at that in a long-term way?
It's hard to hypothesize, but I will say this. When we look at instruction in general education and we look at our practices, and that's why I'm saying I think the overarching piece is having this crosswalk between general ed and special education. So when we look at, let's use Hegarty for an example, we're doing that in our classrooms. We're doing foundations in our classrooms. We have our first cohort after last year that went through foundations for 5 years. I think as we improve, but as we look at the robust program we have in general ed to really addressing literacy, we may very well see a reduction or a need for special education as we do that. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is, and again, not knowing, it's your student population. You have students, if you remember 1 year, we had 68, I think it was, remember that year where 68 students moved in with IEPs? So that's an anomaly, and that was an incredible number to have that year, and you'll see those. So I think it's student population, I think it's early identification, and I think it's really looking at our crosswalk with general ed and SRBI.
Mrs. Best?
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you always, everyone, for a glossary. Just a question on the educational classifications. Does that look different over a 5 year trend? I looked back at last year and it looked pretty steady. Would it be pretty steady with a bigger picture?
I think again, it's your student population. And also, since we know that ASD trend has been really 1 in 44 students as opposed to 1 in 80 students, we very may well see a trend of increase in that.
Thanks.
Mr. Sini?
I hate to talk about economics or special ed in economic terms, but it sounded like as you were answering Jill's question that by identifying the students earlier, we might be more productive or better meet their needs, through their life cycle in the Darian Public Schools. So maybe the intensity of services is we're not playing catch up, if you will. Is that a good way to think about it?
It is, and it also is that early identification shows that there might be also early exiting from special education. if you really, and that's why Margie Gillis, and she's been a wonderful support. If you look at early childhood and the acquisition of reading in pre-K, kindergarten, first, and you really have intensive services there, you might see, if not a decrease in services and exiting of services as you go on in the years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mrs. Ackman.
Well, I think to Mrs. McCammon's question, it's important in terms of long-term planning, because we've seen this many years. I mean, Mr. Maroney and I have discussed bubbles going through, and what does that mean, right? Year after year, we go back and forth at each other about bubbles. But this year is another great example of saying we planned as best we could. And yet what we're still doing as a district, and we should be proud of, is meeting the needs of 69 students that want to and need to learn just like their peers. And so I think it's a credit. It also shows the hard part about planning, because you can plan as much as you can in forecast. But if 69 kids show up and have needs, we are committed to meeting those needs. So I think that's an important kind of, we can't quite map this out or Excel spreadsheet this as much as we can, because the kids are dynamic. And if we're catching them earlier, all the better for it. So thank you. I'm not entirely sure how you all do it sometimes, but I do think, once again, we're in a year that illustrates, even with our best estimates, one, this is difficult to plan for, and two, we are committed to planning for students. And I certainly hope that continues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so we've done, and thank you for the presentation and to Mrs. Ackman's point and everyone's point of all the work that's being done. Question going back to the SESSAPs and the school psychologists that were done 2 years ago, is part of the rationale for bringing them in was too much time was spent in PPTs, and we wanted to have diversity, but there was also a little conflict about the SESSAPs, and that they were going to be only in special ed. So I'm curious, do we have a breakdown of how much time is being spent in SDI, PPT, and general ed for not only the SES, the school psychologist, the general AP, and the regular principals as well? Do we have a breakdown of that?
We haven't done the numbers on that. We certainly could run that. It will change also, of course, as we go through the year and as more referrals come in, but we certainly can do a snapshot and look at it from September to January.
Yeah, I realize it's early and you're still working through the kinks, but I think it's something that we need to try to track going forward.
I'm glad to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mrs. Klein, have you seen with the increase, and I worry about the challenge with getting teachers, getting paras, getting folks to provide some of these services. How are you managing that? And if the trend continues, we had always looked at investing in where we could do it best ourselves and keep the students in-house, so to speak, versus putting them to outside services. Do you see that shifting? And going to more outside specialized services based on sometimes an inability to find the right people to come in and be part of the team? And how do you see that a little bit long-term?
I think it's, again, hard to predict long-term, Mr. Dean, because it depends on your cohort of students. I can tell you from last year to this year, we have 2 less students that have been IEP placed. So we have 2 less than last year. That said, it depends on students who move in and what their needs are, as well as what we have. But I don't see the trend as going up. I think as we build programs, we're better able to address our students' needs. Again, it could change if you have a different population coming in. But I think we've gotten much better. I mean, if you look at our DLC program, when we started here 7 years ago, in Hindley, there was 1 student. There are 13 now. So I think that's really, a support of all of the wonderful work our special education teachers and clinicians are doing, and administrators. So our hope is we continue to build programs to keep our students here, and that number should actually decrease, again, depending on student need, if they need a more intensive environment.
Mr. Brown.
Shirley, just to follow up from something that Dennis said, and I apologize because I didn't prepare in advance, but going way back to when we were about to put in the new school psychologist, you'd given a main presentation, then you had a follow-up presentation. And in the follow-up presentation, towards the end of that slide deck, probably the bottom right of the slide, was sort of a breakdown of our DERG and what the breakdown was of the school psychologists versus social workers. And if you're going to give us an update of some of the stuff which you had mentioned into the budget, would love an update on that, just in terms of if there've been any changes in that trend. If it's not a lot of work for you, that'd be great. And also what keyed off was Dennis asking about what's going on in terms of the workload. We had seen, I think last year, the year before, a breakdown of scheduling and how people's scheduling had been affected with the second psychologist being in. So anything in that information, workload and scheduling would be great to see. And thank you for all your work.
Thank you. We can certainly do that. Thank you. And I remember the slide also.
Mrs. Klein, the other thing I would ask, and I think this is for our overall population, but I think it plays into, down the road, is I think we have to keep an eye out for the amount of dwellings that are going to become available over the next couple of years. There are literally hundreds of apartments ranging in size from studios to 3 bedrooms. So, to everyone's question here and to your response, it's difficult to look out and strategize, but I think we have to be prepared in some instances, and I think we do, to turn on a dime as these buildings come online and people start coming into town, and they're coming into town for the education and the services that we provide. So I think it's something we have to stay close to in terms of a board and administrative conversation. So I'll just throw that out there. Mr. Maroney.
Kind of switching gears a little bit to SRBI. Have we, if I recall, there was talk that we were seeing an increase last spring. Have we continued to see an increase in the fall, or has that abated or somewhat? And second question is, do we have a capacity threshold for SRBI, or can we just keep going with that?
Right now, we do have the additional 2.5 FTE that we had through the ESSER funding. So as far as capacity, there hasn't been a need right now. The challenge with SRBI is ideally students are exiting SRBI because you don't want to stay for an extended period of time, because that means students' needs are not being met. But as of right now, I feel like we are adequately staffed. So you wouldn't see any changes in the proposed budget that's coming.
Have we seen an increase though?
I can check. It changes every 6 weeks, but right now there's no concern about the caseload numbers. When there are, one more thing, when caseload numbers do emerge, it's usually in the spring as the year goes on. So we're at a stage right now where that wouldn't be an issue.
Thank you, Mr. Tranberg. Mrs. Ackman.
So on my favorite topic of SLP. Sorry, SLP, because I love to follow that line for so many reasons, but we're always, it feels to me that historically that's a line where we consistently look or need to make transfers into, which again, very proud to do to meet our students' needs. But as you're talking about new programs, are there any generalized needs you're seeing there, or changes with our earliest learners that would help maybe identify those needs earlier or catch? Is there anything with that line? Because we do seem to consistently need to fund that line and meet those children's needs. And even when we thought maybe we'll dial it back, we still see the need exist. So again, I'm appreciative of us continuing to meet the need, but I'm just wondering, are we learning anything holistically over time that we can employ, or no, that's just the current need and band, I won't steal your word, bubble, that we're in.
I think both things are true, Mrs. Ackman. I think the notion is that we are learning over time. That said, our student population still requires a very high level, especially when you have programs that you built, like our DLC programs, our ALC programs, that really require a lot of augmented devices, require a lot of technology, require a lot of different levels of speech and language. Looking at prompt therapy, looking at different, ALCs, looking at those opportunities. I don't know that I don't see it changing. I do think that building our own capacity and training our own PD for our speech therapists would be our best opportunity for that, of doing that. And I think that's where our emphasis is, and we'll continue to do that. We're not there yet, but I think that's what our growth would be. It's also very often that, especially with children, with children who are nonverbal or children who really require different levels of speech and language therapy, you have multiple people working at the same time, so you may not have them all employed. It's that if you might have, we're very robust. We've got 17.5, I believe. Okay, okay, I'm close. Speech and language pathologists across the district. And yet, when you look at our high school, we don't have the support, we need support in the high school. So we have to look at the trends of when kids are arriving and where they are. And that really determines it. But I think there's a combination. We probably will always need to do contracting because of the nature of levels of support that kids need and the simultaneous level of support. It's really simultaneous also.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up.
Sure,
I'm
Ms.
sorry, you don't need to have an answer now, but if we're looking at increased caseloads, which the numbers would seem to be, we are looking in areas. Are we also looking at our communication back to parents? I know at one point we had, guidelines, parents check in with everyone on their caseload, or I'm sorry, people are checking in based on their students in their caseload, once a week or, twice a week. Are we making sure that with increased demands on our providers, the communication is staying consistent and getting home to parents? Because I do think there's still a fair amount of concern in the community, of time out of school and what that means going forward. So I just want to make sure communication is happening between providers and parents.
We're maintaining the same practice of in secondary and middle school and high school every other week.
Okay.
So they are reaching out. It's either by phone or by email, whatever the families and the provider have decided. So we are maintaining that. Again, I'd ask anyone who's not getting that to please reach out to the chain of communication if it's not, but our staff is committed to doing that. On the elementary level, we have not implemented that. It's a very different design, but very often PPTs will recommend that there's a weekly communication book. With our younger learners, there's a different level of communication also. There might be a lot of Google Docs are happening now also. In the elementary school, we're using Google Docs and at Middlesex as well to communicate with parents. Parents can write in of what's going on at home. Teachers write in of what's happening in school. So we have been able to be efficient by using electronic communication also.
Thank you.
Mrs. McCammon. Go ahead. Hold on, Jill. Dr. Adler.
I would just not clarify, I would just reiterate what Mrs. Klein said, just about the need to, they're not her words, but the need to address SLP and how we're providing it at the high schools as we move forward. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Mrs. McCammon.
Looking specifically at the category of learning disability, and I know we have a lot of children with learning disabilities who might be classified otherwise, but I know we've done a tremendous amount of investment in reading related disabilities. Are we seeing any growth in mathematically related disabilities? Are we doing some future planning for kids? Are you seeing any changes in the classifications there, and specifically interested in math?
No, I mean, I haven't, Ms. McCann, but I can certainly ask the other program directors, if they've seen that. I haven't seen a trend in that, honestly, in terms of dyscalculia or math I'd say over a decade. Now, you're right. Maybe it's because the predominant, learning difference is in literacy, and we don't focus as much on the mathematics. So it might just be the way we're focusing on it. But I have not seen that. I haven't seen that in the trend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCann. We have the whole team on here. Any other questions or comments from the board around this? Good. Mrs. Klein, any last comments, you or your team?
No, just thank you for all your support and working with us. And as you said, Ms. Sockman, that we're able to really address the needs of all our students, and we'll just continue to do that. Thank you.
I would just close out by saying that in visiting the schools, the care and dedication of our support staff from ELP up to high school students is just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, it does make you extremely proud of the work that they do. So congratulations to the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein. Thank you for the team on Zoom. Thank you for zooming in and being with us this evening, and for all the hard work and organizing the presentation. Thank you. Happy holidays. We will move on to update on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Adley and Mr. Tranberg.
Good evening, everyone. The memo includes our last DEI update, as well as just links to the initial memo and the slide deck regarding the work that the equity team is going to complete. Just trying to keep everything in one place for ease. So that is there. Since we last had an update at the end of October, the middle school did bring in the Anti-Defamation League to address some of the anti-Semitic behavior that was happening. The program occurred over several weeks with hearing from firsthand someone related to a Holocaust survivor. There was also a high school student in a nearby high school who shared some of her story about dealing with bullying related to anti-Semitic behavior as well. And that happened over Zoom, and the students actually had an opportunity to ask that student questions as well during their flex time. There was also a follow-up at a flex class talking about the importance of symbols and what those mean, and trying to develop that understanding further. Additionally, the middle school students initiated a Gender Sexuality Alliance Club, GSA, and they found someone to be their advisor, and several other staff agreed to support the students in that as well. And since we met in October, Ken Shelton was here during our professional development on Election Day, at which time he met with our middle school staff and he met with the high school staff. And he also met with a group of middle school students and high school students, knowing that he may not be continuing that work, but we were trying to offer a space for students to have a conversation and engage in some of their experience and learn about Mr. Shelton's experience as well. At the high school, additionally, there have been some focus groups, and from the focus group, there also came a student leadership forum. And so these are students who are wanting to partake in the work. And from that group, another partnership is emerging with ADL to bring in the Names Can Really Hurt Us program, which is to the board's question of were there other things that might happen. So here are two collaborations with the ADL that have come since then. As far as continued work with Mr. Shelton, we did have him contracted for some work, and there were additional funds requested. So all the work that we've done with him so far is under what we had initially contracted. And I will say in the initial presentation of Mr. Shelton, I talked about him being a consultant. And the importance of a consultant is they're not here to deliver a program, because with the DEI work, right now we need to build the capacity of our staff, our students, and our administrative team. And that's what this partnership with him is designed to do. There is no Ken Shelton method of doing the work. He's here to evoke the talents of our staff. And I will say the very first week I was here, not on the topic of DEI at all, but I was working with another outside contractor that the district has worked with for years. And he welcomed me to the district and he said, I want to let you know that your administration and your teachers are raging with talent and competence. And that is absolutely true. This area is an area where we need to learn. And Mr. Shelton was selected because he can evoke the talents and make sure we remain excellent in the area of DEI. I also hear and understand concerns about a specific article or blog post that Mr. Shelton had written. He's also written other things and he's presented on other things. On an unrelated topic, one of my favorite authors in educational leadership wrote a book on a philosophy of instructional coaching. That does not resonate with me. I like someone else's approach to instructional coaching, but I have not canceled that author to do other work. And so I just want us all to keep that in mind, that we have many positions and we have many levels of work that we do as professionals. And Mr. Shelton is not here to work with Darian Public Schools on grading. So I just want to make sure that is clear for the record. So the final portion of the memo talks a bit about if we do not have a transfer to work with Mr. Shelton for the other services as originally presented, we would really focus on having him return to do some work with the DEI team and the faculty. And if those services can be expanded, that goes to our community partnership, and really working with those student groups as well. So that's all. That's a high level summary of the memo, and I'm glad to answer any questions.
So we
Thank
have,
you, Mr. Tramberg. Go ahead, Dr. Abbott.
so again, we have adjusted the plan accordingly, given that we haven't come to closure on this issue. I wish we would come to closure, to be honest with you, as quickly as we possibly can on this particular issue, because it's important to our kids and it's important to our staff. I think in many other issues, we would actually come to closure more quickly, in all honesty. But that being said, we've modified it so that in the event if the transfer doesn't go through, then Mr. Shelton can complete something and not just be itty bitty doing bits and pieces and have to leave again. At least it is completed. So it's with that intent that I would look forward to January of bringing that transfer forward and hopefully with approval to move forward with the important work. And yes, as Christopher said, he's not here to take away AP classes and deal with grades. He's here to deal with inclusion. Actually, if you deal with inclusion, diversity and equity will follow. And that's the main thing our kids need. And to give them the voice in that and to support our staff through that. So I just want to, I recognize what people say and I recognize what they're citing, but that is not his charge to do that. And anyone that we get to do this work is going to be confrontational to some degree in some capacity. It's thought-provoking and it's difficult work. I'm totally confident in his ability to do that. He's worked with CES, which is our RESC, to do trainings across the region. He's done professional development with staff, not just recently, but like 2 years ago, and was very well received. He's been extremely well received by the kids and they're extremely well received by the staff since. So I'm confident that he can continue the work. But with that, we'll be bringing the transfer request forward to the board.
Thank you, Dr. Riley. Mr. Tredberg, can you give a little more detail on the work that he's done? I've heard very positive comments from students that he's met with, specific to the high school, a number of students that I've spoken to. So I think what helps the board and what helps everyone that's paying attention in the community is, what has he done up there? What does the work product look like? What is the end product of that work? And, we heard, I think during one session, I think actually Mr. Shelton said it himself, that one of the takeaways from meeting with the students at the high school was they weren't feeling they were being listened to and that we needed to do more listening. So I think it would help knowing that what's the work that's been done? When are we going to see or hear about that work? Even if it's part of a bigger picture. And that, to reiterate, so far what I've heard has been positive in terms of his interaction with the students. I mean, he is a teacher, he's an educator, so.
So his work with students was extremely limited. I think he had 75 minutes with the high school group and 75 minutes with the middle school group. So as you can imagine on this topic, that is not much time to dig in deep.
Well, I don't know necessarily what the topic was or what the questions were. I know he made a comment about what he got out of the session.
So what occurred in that session is he told a bit of his story and his experience. Because when you're doing equity work, at the heart of it comes to story. And when you can understand someone's story and experience and perspective, it helps us think, know, and understand and be able to do things potentially differently and sometimes not. So he talked a bit about his story and then tried to hear from the students, what has some of their experience been? And that's a different conversation with middle school students than it is with high school students. And you're right, the loud and clear message from the high school students, and it wasn't only in that session, it's kind of transpired in other places. It's really about the adult language and our preparedness and ability to say what's actually happening, and not masking what's happening or using general terms. So instead of saying an inappropriate symbol, but to say an anti-Semitic symbol. So that's the language that the students were using. And they appreciated the time and the space for someone to, in a relatively smaller group and safe setting, who's it going to go to, that we're here, he's here to listen to them, and it's a safe space to have those conversations. And since then, the administration at the high school has tried to replicate some of that to provide more spaces for students to have those conversations. With the goal of any work is that it lives on past the people that are implementing the work. So Mr. Shelton is not going to, if we continue working with him, he's not an employee of the Darian Public Schools. We're not contracting him indefinitely. He's building the capacity of the people that are here. So we have the ability to do that work and continue beyond him. And the work with the students is really about creating conditions for them to not be bystanders when they see things that are not okay. And when you hear a story about seeing a swastika on a bus, the type of thing that we need students to do is if they saw the student drawing the swastika on the bus, they're empowered enough to confront what they're seeing. And it sounds like a simple thing, but it's something we're actually terrible at as adults. When we see things, how often do we engage in things that might be none of our business? So what this work is at the core is we're asking students to be brave and courageous enough to do things that we have a really hard time doing ourselves. And I think that's some of the fear that comes with it is how do I have the conversation? Because they're messy. Like if you try to engage in a conversation like this, it's going to be messy, and it's going to be messy for a long time until you have a lot of them. And after you have a lot of them, you've practiced and you're better and you understand. So that's really what this is about. And I know there's this desire for specificity and measures. Hey, if that existed with any of the people that are doing this work, someone would be very, very wealthy and we'd be in a very different place as a society. This is messy and we just have to be willing to have the conversation. So sorry to be somewhat ambiguous with my answer, but it's really about providing space to have the conversation and help us develop the plan that's going to work for Darian, not a plan that's predetermined, that's prescribed, that this is what it looks like when it's done. And because we have some of those that are in the works. Like we are in our ruler implementation year, which is a year of staff training. And yes, we're developing our own version of ruler, but there are specific things that we are doing to develop common language around social and emotional learning. And we have to do the same thing with DEI, and the talent exists with the staff and administration we have to do that work. We're just saying it would be helpful to have the support of this person, not to tell us what to do, but to help us articulate our own goals and develop that plan over the course of however long we have to work with them.
I appreciate that. Not that you're ambiguous. I think that helped a lot. It helped me a lot. I think it's something the board needed to hear. I look at any consultant that comes on board is being driven by our values, our community values, our district values, our kids' values. I think we heard it in the audience today. Are we listening to the students? You said we are listening to the students. I think what I heard makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate that. I think you added some clarity to some of this, which I think is helpful, but I'll open it up to additional board questions and comments. Mr. Sini.
So just to get the timeline correct, you presented to the board, I think in a presentation dated September 14th, that Mr. Shelton was given a keynote address. Was that part of the initial contract that you were working on with him as a contractor?
So Mr. Shelton did a keynote address for convocation in 2020.
Okay, so that was
the previous school year. That was our first contact and the first interaction that the district had with Mr. Shelton. And then in September, I believe it was an overview of just the committee work itself. And then in October, the memo proposed Mr. Shelton as the person to do the work.
So then let's fast forward to this year after discovering, let's use the blatant language, symbols of hate and some phrases of hate. This board approached the administration, I guess it was in October at some point, and asked you to do more, if I remember correctly, than just a assembly and a one-time kind of assembly and then move on. And so I guess my question to clarify, this next memo, or which outlines the next bout of work, is outlined in page 3 of the memo that you supplied. And we're going, and that is going to be processed, hopefully through a budget transfer that you're going to come to the board in January, correct?
Yeah, this has been modified and truncated because his anticipated start time was earlier, but since time has went by, we've truncated it. But yes, essentially,
Okay.
yes.
So right now, this board hasn't had the opportunity to weigh in, and the opportunity for this board to weigh in is going to be basically a budget transfer. You're comfortable with Mr. Shelton. He's been working with the district since 2020. You've heard the concerns of the community and some of the questions. And, frankly, from this board, during the opportunity that we had to speak with Mr. Shelton, you're still comfortable moving forward.
Yes, we are. And I understand that there are other opportunities. It's nice to see the kids giving their own voice and having the courage to come forward to say, this is the need we have. For instance, the club at the middle school. It's nice to see our 2 administrators at the middle school and the high school taking on the initiative to bring in other agencies. When it's not as if it's going to be Mr. Shelton show, right? Because we have to do the work. It has to come within. We have to build our capacity within, and people step up. And so there'll be lots of different opportunities, hopefully along the way, for other experiences for kids and adults.
Thank you.
Mrs. Warren.
Well, so I have a few questions. One, a question that was asked of Mr. Shelton when he was here that was never really answered, is about his experience working with a school district of our size. I think we're still waiting for an answer on that one. Two, curious about the students he's talking to, how those students are selected, how it's coming about. Are they signing up for that? Are they chosen? How is that working? And you also mentioned the audit. And I'm still curious about what's going on with the audit. You know, you do say that Ken's not going to have anything to do with grading or any of that, but it does mention grades in the audit categories. And I'm just curious how we're looking at grades within that.
So when it comes to the audit, you're looking at many data points and how they impact students in different groups. So it's whatever their current grades are. So if we're using report card grades, or we can use GPA, it depends on the data point that we decide to use when the audit is designed. And you look at that data point across, say, gender, special education, identification, race, socioeconomic status. And then from there, where disparities exist, where there's overrepresentation of a subgroup, that's when you just determine specific actions and goals for those areas. So grades in that context is related to how students are currently performing, not about grading practices. The first question you had, when the first memo that was proposed in October, I talked a bit about Mr. Shelton's resume and the different districts he's worked with. He's worked with some big cities. He's worked with districts like ours. In a follow-up conversation, because I did ask, like, that wasn't a super clear response. I can certainly talk to you more about what they are. But he says it's not his practice. I know what they are, but he tends not to talk about the districts he's working with because it's messy work. So to go around and say, yes, I'm working with Darian because they're having all of these challenges, that's not typical. But there are districts that profile very similar to ours that he's worked with. And I think I actually did mention them in October.
Well, I think if it comes to the top of my head, the one that's most familiar, I believe, I'll check myself, but I think it's Parkland PA, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's it as well. And I missed a question in there. Sorry.
Oh, I was curious about the students.
Oh, the students, I believe the principals or administrators sent out an interest inventory or survey, and students self-identified that they'd be interested in the work. And one place there were enough spaces, and I think at another school there may have been more students interested than possible to manage for the size of the group.
Thank you, Mrs. Warren. Mrs. Best.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris, for the update. And I think it is helpful to hear you talk about how this is not Ken Shelton coming to Darian Public Schools to implement his program, but rather to facilitate our administration and implementing the correct program for our district, as I hear it. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the relationship between SEL and DEI. I feel like we are hearing questions from members of the community where those two things, which I understand are related, but they're being confused for being the same. And it might be helpful to spend a minute on that.
Sure, thank you for that question. I heard that a bit as well. And I'm going to steal a phrase from my colleague and boss. They're not mutually exclusive, but they are different things. There's certainly an overlap between diversity, equity, and inclusion and social emotional learning. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is really looking at the differences that exist and the disparities that might exist as a result of differences. When you're talking about social emotional learning, it's looking at what are our understandings of ourselves and how we work with others and how we navigate the world through our, I'll say emotions, but that's an oversimplification. But there is There's definitely a Venn diagram where in the middle, yes, there is overlap like there is with everything, because we can't do anything without having awareness of our own emotions and how we regulate and navigate the world, work with self, manage ourselves, make decisions. But they're not the same at all. And when you're looking at programs specifically, there are programs that really are dealing with social emotional learning. There aren't too many programs that are DEI focused, but there are also like character programs, and those are another different thing. So when we're talking about the importance of kindness and respect and everyone has value, yes, that is really important. It's something we believe to be true. But right now we need to develop common language around DEI so we can do that other work, because there's more to it than, yes, we just need to be nice and kind to everybody. So I'll stop there.
If I could just add, I had read an article today that referred to DEI as the house, so to speak, and that SEL was sort of the tools, how to operate within that house. But until you've created the house, you don't have that space or the common language, like you're saying, within which to operate. Does that kind of?
I like it. I love it, but I'm sure that people that are in the SEL research world would say that SEL is the house and DEI lives on it. So, just out of respect to them, it's whatever your lens and view is how you make sense of the rest of the world. Some people make sense of everything through SEL. Some might make sense of it through DEI. Some might make sense of it through none of the above. And that's okay. But something we know for sure, because we're hearing it from our students, we're hearing it from our staff, is we need to learn something about DEI so we can at least try to have a conversation without being afraid to have a conversation. Because our students that have graduated have told us loud and clear, I had a wonderful education. I was very prepared for just about everything except this part. I didn't know what to do here. And I think we have an obligation, and it's something we can do. And like I said, we have the talent to do.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. So sort of two questions, Chris, and one is going to Mrs. Worm's question about the survey design. And you mentioned that you would take different categories or groupings, and then you would look at whatever test results. If I'm understanding the actual design of that test, if your criteria is going to be grouping and you see disparities by group, then by definition, wouldn't that test indicate that it's those underlying characteristics of the cause? I mean, how do you take causation? Like if we did here, math scores for, and we split it by men and women, and men do worse and women do better, then is it because I'm a man, I'm not as good at math? Like just that design, I don't see how you don't get to that result.
So once you have the results with an equity audit, it's not end of story, that's the start.
Okay.
And the first thing you ask is, okay, why is this the case? So it's called a root cause analysis. And so typically with root cause, you might just put things that we know because of research, it might be this, it might be that. But what we do with the whole point of an equity audit, and we have some opportunity because our groups are going to be small, right? These subgroups are going to be smaller subgroups, which actually gives you an opportunity to get to someone's story faster, because we want to know the root cause of that person's story to help us have an understanding. And so we don't want to say it's causation. We want to understand if there's trends that exist and perpetuate themselves over time. And then ask, is there something that we're able to do about it within the scope of the school? Because schools can't do everything, but there are some things that we can do.
Got it. I guess, the question, it's, and I probably don't know the answer now, but the initial reaction is that doing this by grouping, I'm not sure what that tells us as opposed to focusing on our individual students. It would be more important for us to help our individual students. That's kind of what the question is, but maybe I'll figure that out over time. The other thing is you had mentioned that you had an author who had certain ideas you liked and certain ideas you don't like. And I mean, I think we have an obligation in our schools to have a space where people can have their thoughts and ideas, and we can have, people's ideas can compete in the arena and fight it out. And that's how you learn how to, it's an important skill we need to have our students learn over time. So without going to the question of, do we think, Ken's the best guy and Ken has the best point of view, like, I don't want to go to that question right now. But, I will note that there's been a lot of concern for the parents. So just keep that in the back of your mind for a second. So what concerns me from an oversight, from a board perspective, and what I'm struggling with, is I look back to Dr. Lamons, and we had Dr. Lamons come in. He was the best of the best of the best.
Is that Dr. Lemons?
Dr. Lemons.
Yeah, oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I just, sorry. I
Connecticut
didn't hear
school
that.
change?
No, I didn't hear.
I can
that.
take this off, Alan. I'd really be happy to do that. If you would.
Sorry.
So Dr. Lamons came in and, he was touted and had great credentials. And a couple things happened over time, a few things. One was that I remember a particular slide where our committee had verbatim used the words from his website, completely accidentally, according to Dr. Lamons, which, was a little incredulous. But, that seemed a little strange. And then we had a very small vocal group that kind of developed that plan that we're still following, strategic plan. And as that plan's come out and it's become more known to the public, it really isn't what the public general throughout the town wants. It really reflects the views of a small group. And some of the stuff's not been well received. And we've heard people talking about the pause. And, I think there may be a reason, because I think some of the top items we're looking at aren't really reflective of where people's interests are. I think it's just a small coterie. And then I look at what we're doing right now with Ken, and I think it's the same thing. And my concern is he comes in, he does this stuff that we already know the parents, a large number of parents are alarmed about. It's the same thing. It's the same model we really had with Dr. Lamons, where he came in, did something a couple people thought was cool. But then when it got known to the broader public, it really wasn't what we're looking for here in town. So how do I, as a board member, have confidence that we're not going to go down that same road?
I can
You can come back.
Or I want to go first. I would just respectfully disagree. I'll go back to just one thing here. Listen, every now and again, you got to look at the scoreboard, okay? Not continually all the time, but where are we on our journey together, whether it's with kids, groups of kids, or categories of kids, or whether it's achievement or whether it's participation. But the kids that are standing up here talking about what they're talking about, and other kids who are talking about things that they're not up here, that's what the culture and climate is of the schools, our schools. It's not what we want to just talk about, right? There's experiences that they have in that school building every single day, and some of them aren't great. And it's time we do something about it. And I would want this board, quite honestly, to step up and support this initiative. David, I just respectfully say that there couldn't be any more inclusive. There was no forced agenda. Yes, there was something on a website, okay? But Dr. Lemons is highly respected across the nation. You'll not get a better person who's more educated, who's highly thought of, again, across the nation, not just in Connecticut. And that process that the board went through was extremely inclusive. Like, you couldn't have a more inclusive process. It started with my entry plan interviewing people. It went to all these constituents. Yes, admittedly, and I don't blame people in the sense of, like, people signed up, they're doing their work and so on, and then getting tuned in at some point and maybe going, aha, wait a minute. I can understand that. That's a bit of a natural process. But this board too went through the process, had their input, supported it, voted for it. And it's a blueprint now. It's honestly, if you ask the staff, I think you would find that it's a real hopeful and inspirational document. And it's not just going to be inspirational. I think you know that it's not going to, you're not going to let it, you wouldn't let me let it sit on a shelf and not do anything about it. It's and it'll be a live document, it'll be revised as we go. But Mr. Brown, I just say, like, I don't know what other inclusive process you could possibly implement in the district. I give the district and the board tremendous credit for the way it approached it.
Yeah, but I mean, you bring up a good point. And again, this is part of what I'm struggling with, Dr. Adley, is that, yes, I voted for it. We all voted for it. But then over time, we find other things that wind up on Dr. Lehman's site, which concerned a lot of people in town. And then we also had the situation where we're told that part of his plan is provocative. And if someone told me I was voting for something provocative, I might have had some more questions before I voted for it. Hence my concern here. What am I getting into? And how do I, as a board member, get that level of confidence to approve the budget allocation in January?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mrs. Ackman.
Thank you. One, respectfully, Mr. Brown, I will disagree. I think we had the plan. We read the plan. We voted for the plan. And then we live by it and we can alter it as we go, but I don't think there was anything provocative that we weren't able to read. His comments were on the website. Maybe we didn't find it. They came up after we hired him, but we had choices then. We could have stopped the process. We as a board didn't. We chose to move forward. So I would also ask that I think as board members, we have to start to quantify when we heard from, most of the town or the community of the town. I don't know we have any way to measure that. We heard from some voices who felt a certain way. We've heard from other voices who feel another way. And we just need to be careful how we quantify that, because I think there are some people who are really proud of this plan. And I think there are some people who have issues with it. And that's okay. That's what we're supposed to hear is 9. But the 9 people who were sitting in these seats at that time voted for it, had all the information. Now, I will say on this DEI, I have been someone who has put up a bit of a stink. I don't like the process. It sounds like now the process will be that we will receive a request for a budget transfer. To Mr. Sini's point, which is strong and valid, we have not been asked for that to make that budget transfer yet. So we actually haven't been asked for action yet. So when we're asked for action, we'll have to make a decision. And my last point, and I get it, it's going to get me in some hot water with people in the community, but we went through a fall of hearing about how people had the right to different political opinions. We had board members go so far as to want to protect political party inside of policy. And now we're going after Mr. Shelton's personal opinions. Now, I agree, someone can have personal political opinions that are so egregious that you just can't get behind it, but homework? I mean, we had a superintendent who took homework out about 10 years ago. The community said, I want it back. And guess what? We got it back. So I feel like we have to we can't talk out of both sides of our mouths. Is anyone really surprised when we were sent an email that said that Mr. Shelton supported Black Lives Matter? That's not overly shocking to me. Like, I just think that people can have, if what we're saying in the fall is people can have their political beliefs, we should support the idea that you can have a range of political beliefs, then we have to think that individuals are going to have their own political beliefs. And if we think that the district and the teachers and our students are so weak that Mr. Shelton's going to come in, then we're doing something wrong in the district to begin with. We've had teachers say that they think we need to look at grading. During COVID, we adjusted grading. We've had teachers say they think that finals at 20% is too much of a percentage for kids on tests. Like, it's not, I think to Mrs. Worm's question, which I think is valid, when I see grades in the equity audit, what does it mean? To me, that's what it means. You could tell me like something. We've heard teachers come to us for years and say, look at this for us. And we haven't. So I don't know if we'll end up there. I don't know if it's valid. I don't know. I got one kid who loves finals, one kid who hates finals. My own personal, I would need an educator to guide me down that path. But I'm just saying, I think that we need to be careful. Anyone we hire, we could start to go down and start to decide whether we agree with their political beliefs, short of something being, to me, really extreme. And for me, my own, like on either side, then I think that we need to just maybe take a deep breath. I don't love that this is going to come to as a budget transfer. I've been clear about it. That's how it's going to come. I'm not going to forestall the process because it's going to come to us as a budget transfer. I understand Mr. Shelton not wanting to answer some of those questions in public, which is why typically we interview in executive session so they can. We didn't do it that way because we also thought it was important for the public to hear. So we had a lot of competing factors. I didn't love the process. It's what's made me really get a little stuck. But I agree with Mr. Sini. We haven't seen a budget transfer. When we see a budget transfer, we'll have to make decisions and stand by our votes at that moment. I mean, that's kind of where I land on it. If you're looking where in space board members are, that's where I am.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so building on that, and agreed, we haven't seen, so putting on Captain Obvious hat, for me, I would just like to see what we're getting with our 40,000, lay it out. Where, do we we're never going to get to 100%, to get to 75, 80. Without it, are we at 15? Are we at 50? I mean, if I misheard, please correct me, but you did say that if we don't approve a budget transfer, he will still come to us with some sort of program without the additional 40K spend. Is that correct? So again, to help me as a board member, what do I get with that? Am I at 20% of what we hope to achieve versus the 80% what we, I think I need to help me get there of what we're missing and what we get for the spend.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney.
And Mr. Maroney, at the bottom of page 2 of the memo, it talks about if we don't retain additional services, it will be the completion of, we'll have 2 more on-site visits and 4 virtual visits to focus on some staff PD and launching and supporting the DEI committee. And then the 3rd page lists if we, the transfer of the 40,000 helps retain additional services, it would be those other things that are there. So I can expand on that too, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mrs. Warren.
I'd be curious as to how much we've actually paid Mr. Shelton up to now for everything he's done since he's been here since, what was it, 2020? You said? Just curious, is this going to be an ongoing, it's almost feeling like booster shots at this point,
So right now he is contracted for $23,000, of which $7,000 has been expended this year. And he did a keynote presentation for us. I would need to confirm, but I believe it was either $1,500 or $1,800 last fiscal year.
Mr. Sini.
I'm just going to state the obvious. This board, in a unanimous fashion, I'm not sure we voted, but again, what we did earlier this fall, as a result of some of those instances of hate, asked this administration to do something. I think were some of the words that were uttered by our board. These professionals talked with experts in the field, are utilizing a resource that already exists in the district, which up until this point, until his name was uttered for a 2nd time or a 3rd time, it was caught on by some folks. I am in agreement that there is no way as a board member, one, I want to get involved in the hiring individual resources because I have 0 expertise in this matter. These 2 individuals are responsible for that expertise. But 2, judging people by their views, we go down a real slippery slope if we start looking at people's views and decide as a board especially, or as a community, to hire them or to pass. And so I'm not going to signal my vote going forward on the budget transfer. But again, reiterating, this delay is not this board. We haven't had the opportunity to weigh in. So I look forward to the January request.
Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mrs. McCammon, I want to make sure I didn't miss your hand. Mrs. McCammon.
Yeah. Just a point of clarification on some of the information in the memo looks like work that was outlined in the strategic plan. So I'm curious to understand if we're moving some of that work forward, if this is all incremental work. Can you help me understand basically why we would be approving a transfer versus just handling this as part of the regular budgetary process? Again, with respect to the point that Mr. Sini made earlier, but about the board's ask. Still, if you could help me understand that, please.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. Jill, could you just so Jill, if I were to kind of recap it, it's kind of like we've got this work built into the strategic plan. Are we pulling work out of the strategic plan and moving it into this DEI project, or kind of what's the overlap and we have dollars?
Are we accelerating some of the work?
Yes, thank you, John. Are we accelerating something out of the strategic plan into this DEI project? Does that make sense, Jill?
Yes.
We're essentially executing on the plan. But go ahead, Chris.
So we're definitely executing on the plan, and that's why we'll be able to, in year 1, it says we're going to have a DEI committee. We will do that. And that has been budgeted for appropriately. But we also asked for community conversations, which is a continuation of what the NCCJ started prior to COVID. And we also asked for something specifically for students. And so these student leadership groups are in addition to what was originally proposed. And that was not necessarily, it was not directly written as any strategic action in the plan. So those are two additional things that were not necessarily within the scope of the plan, but yes, they are enhancements.
That answer your question, Jill?
Mostly, I'm just going to push it again, just so it's clear. So, but you're not saying it's $40,000 for the community work and the student work. You're saying that we are escalating, or excuse me, accelerating certain portions of the strategic plan. Otherwise, that would have showed up as part of
Yes,
the.
absolutely. Like we increased, there's more professional development included as well than the original scope. Yes.
And then I want to ask just one or two questions about specific bullets, because I think one of the things that happens, to the point that you've made, Chris, in particular, is that this is very new work. So I find that a lot of times we are all filling in the blanks in terms of what we mean when we talk to one another. So if I look specifically, for example, at bullet number 2 under the facilitation of a district-wide DEI committee, and it's where it says analyze data following and strategically identify root causes of inequities. Would you please give 2 or 3 concrete examples of what you're what you're planning to look at and what you think you might be doing with what you turn up? Again, knowing that it's new work.
So the analyzing data would specifically address the equity audit. So once the audit is completed, we would look and see, well, where do the biggest disparities exist that we feel like we can do something about? So for example, we might see that students with learning differences are significantly underrepresented in advanced placement courses at the high school. So if that happens, we look at that compared to all of the other things that we see. And then as a group, we make decisions of, well, what are the most actionable things that this group feels like they can, and this group is an advisory group. They are doing some research, they're working on root cause, and they're trying to try to help and give us ideas as to what to do. So they're going to look at data at that level. When we talk about, I'll use one of the most common, that's data that exists all over the country, no matter where you are, looking at, say, in-school suspensions. And then we do that data analysis, and we see that Black male students are disproportionately overrepresented with in-school suspensions. So number one, we have less than, I think, 2%. So the chances of us having a large enough number, if that's happening, that's to your point, Mr. Brown, we need to be doing something anyway, because we need to do something for every student, and that's something that that should already be actionable. So we would make those types of determinations. But it's the point when we do this is when you have someone with that expertise, they can guide the conversation and also bring it into the context of, well, what can a group like this actually do? And how can they advise and how can they learn? So those are 2 examples. I hope they're concrete enough.
Thank you. One of the questions that I've heard from multiple community members is why are we prioritizing this work now over some of the remediation and academic work that we might need to do coming out of COVID? Can you take a few minutes and talk about how this work, in your mind, how would you answer that question?
I would say that this work is in the way of students accessing their learning. If students are coming to school and they feel like they are bullied as a result of a learning difference or their gender identity, they aren't available to learn. So yes, everything's important. And it doesn't mean we're only doing this. It's but if we don't do this, we're missing a very important group of students who aren't able to access their learning at all. Because often the groups that we're talking about that need the academic supports often are the students that we're talking about with being a subgroup, so to speak, for the lack of a better description, that we might identify as needing supports in that area as well. Again, sorry, Dr. Adley, not mutually exclusive.
I think you're on mute, Jill.
Thank you. Sorry, one more question. So going down to the support administration and staff and their professional learning in order to develop curricula that are culturally responsive to student needs. And we've had a lot of, or there's multiple things there, but we've had a lot of discussion about transparency in in curricular development, and we've had a lot of conversation about some bits and bobs of content. Can you talk about one, how this dovetails with our general move towards transparency in curriculum, again with the understanding we haven't done much with curriculum in 2 years, and then secondly, what does specifically it mean to be culturally responsive in your words?
So in my words, being culturally responsive means that we are being thoughtful of the representation and the portrayal of all of the students that exist within our community and beyond. So we want to make sure that that they can see themselves in what they are learning. That's what culturally responsive is all about. As far as in the spirit of transparency, the curriculum subcommittee did talk about that a bit, and just in the presentation and the clarity and consistency of how our documents look is certainly a way that I'm hoping to make things more transparent for everyone. And I felt like I ended with a question right there, but is there more I can offer on that?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McKenna. Any other board questions? Dr. Adley, anything you want to?
No, I thank the board for the discussion and the actual community, and I honestly think there's more common ground on this than separates anybody, any office. I just think that there is common ground that when you look at our kids, and you look at our staff, you look at our needs, you look where we are, and I think there's a lot of common ground that we and fertile ground that we need to actually get to work on. But thank you.
So I appreciate that. I will appreciate all the conversation from the community, all the emails and all the conversations I think a lot of us have individually. We listen, we will continue to listen. It's important to hear. I want to thank the board. Not an easy conversation, and we're doing it in public as we should. And I think we're responding to a lot of the feedback we get from people that we know. Chris, I want to thank you. I think you helped tee it up, or bring it to the point of, we're in the driver's seat from a community standpoint around our values and what we want this to look like and what we feel we need our students to help our students with. And I think the most important thing is that we are listening to our students, and we need to continue to listen to our students. I appreciate the comments around the strategic plan. I mean, we've talked about a strategic plan for almost 8 years that I've been on the board. I think a lot of work has been done around the strategic plan. I think a lot of people were involved. I look at it as a fluid document that'll continue to drive the district, but will continue to change and adapt as we do as a district. So thanks for the conversation and all the questions. We will move on to discussion and possible approval of the charge for the Board of Education Curriculum Committee. Sarah Perrin and Chris Trainberg. Sarah is not with us this evening. Chris, you can jump in, and I know Julie and everyone else, whoever else was part of the curriculum committee meeting. What we discussed, and we've discussed doing this with each of the subcommittees, is looking at a charge to define what that subcommittee is working on, and also define the responsibility of that subcommittee when it does its work and making a recommendation to the board, much like the finance committee does its work of reviewing the finances and making sure they're in agreement and that the transfers are understandable, and making that recommendation to the board. So the curriculum committee had a good conversation around a proposed charge that they wanted to move up to the board. And the charge is, the responsibility of the curriculum committee is to review new curricula and courses, review new instructional programs, review current curriculum and curriculum updates, review data to determine curriculum effectiveness and student growth, and ensure policy alignment. Approving curriculum remains the responsibility of the full Board of Education. And the curriculum committee will provide recommendations to the board as appropriate. I think if you hadn't seen the curriculum committee meeting, it is posted, and you should go in and look at the link. We really kind of stepped it back to the beginning, and Mr. Tranberg made a presentation of kind of the overall structure and the people and the players that are involved in curriculum, and brought it back to the whole process of how curriculum works. It's been a little bit of a challenge, and I would say nothing much has been done with curriculum over the last 2 years, other than trying to execute on the curriculum we have and deliver it through a pandemic. And there is curriculum that was approved and being implemented prior to Chris even coming on board. So hopefully, as we move out of the pandemic and we have this curriculum committee set up and running, we'll get back to really the work of looking at curriculum. Mr. Tranberg, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, well said.
Okay, thank you. Julie?
No, the only thing I would add is that in our discussion at the committee meeting, we did discuss the fact that this is the work that the board has always done. And
Good point.
most recently hasn't been done by a designated curriculum committee, subcommittee of the board, but that all of this has always been the practice of the board.
Good, thank you. Good, so we'll move forward with a motion to approve the charge for the curriculum committee. Mr. Sini, second by Mrs. Ackman. All those in favor? That is unanimous with the folks around the table. Are you good, Jill? And thank you for all the work around that. And we look forward to the ongoing curriculum committee meetings. We'll move forward. Update first semester board master agenda, Dr. Adley.
Yes, just the first semester calendar is there as it's recorded what we've done, and there's been minor modifications for it. I'm happy for the board to do a bit of reflection on it. If there's any changes, additions that you think we should add or subtract from it, but it reflects the work that we've done.
Yes, Mr. Sini.
Just one item that we still have to have follow up on is the rights agreement in a meeting.
Yes.
Executive session committee meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sini. Dr. Adley and I spoke about that last week, so we'll be getting that on an agenda item. It's a busy January, but
Yeah, well, I didn't see it anywhere, so fit it in.
Yep.
That's the term. What was it? Well, I didn't hear.
The lights agreement.
Oh, the lights agreement.
Yeah, so just wherever you can fit it.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Sini. Any other conversations about the first semester board master agenda? All right, again, discussion, any comments or thoughts, just let us know. We will move on to presentation and discussion of the proposed board master agenda for February through August of 2022.
So for anyone who's new to the board, perhaps the last one we just did was a historical document a little bit, and now we look ahead to February through August, and the actual budget calendar also providing you with meetings that will be happening up until February. So this is the proposed master agenda. And again, I'm certainly open to the board looking at everything from retreats to anything in between if they would like to.
Any questions or anything right now on this? Again, first kind of conversation, and look it over, and again, anything between now and the next meeting, let us know, and we'll move forward with the vote next meeting. Moving on to action items, personal items, appointments, resignations, and retirements. Simon.
So we continue to experience a larger than usual number of people leaving us in the middle of the year, but we managed to hire 4, including 3 who are certified staff.
Good. Thank you. Any board questions or comments? All right. May I have a motion to approve the PAR as presented for December 14th, 2021. Mrs. Best, second by Mrs. Ackman. All those in favor? Jill, that is unanimous with all folks sitting here at the table. We will move back to Michelle and public comment. I will start out with any of our friends in the audience. Please step up. Thank you.
Hello, Julie Punishil, 23 Fitch Avenue. I have 3 points I'd like to make tonight. First of all, if you are not a student, a parent of the students, or have not had an in-depth conversation with said students, I would really appreciate, as a parent of one of the students who has spoken, if you no longer try to speak for them. I'm speaking to some of the parents who spoke earlier tonight. Using them and invoking what they spoke about for your agenda is really offensive, because you haven't taken the time to reach out to my daughter. You haven't been Dr. Adley or Chris Tranberg, who have taken the time to meet with them and speak with them. And I would appreciate if you stop using their words on your behalf. That's my first point. My second point is Mr. Brown. I do not believe that most parents of Darian have issues with the strategic plan. And I'm really quite offended that you said that. And I don't feel like you represent my views. And I would appreciate you not trying to invoke that most parents think one thing or another. And my third point, and why you can tell I'm really revved up, is I'm disappointed. I mean, these incidents happened in September, in October. These students came and spoke to you in October and asked you to act. And in all honesty, aside from what was done at the middle school, not much has been done. And now it looks like this vote's going to get pushed back to January. And I feel like there's some very loud members and parents of the community who are trying to push the brakes on DEI. And I feel like you are allowing that to happen. And it's very disappointing. And the students are disappointed because they don't see any change. They don't feel heard, to what Mr. Tranberg was saying. They don't feel like they're being listened to. And when Dr. Adley talked to my daughter, she talked about with her sexuality issues and coming out, there is probably less than 5 teachers or administrators or adults in the school system that she felt were safe for her to come and talk to. How is that okay? That's her, the marginalized students, the students of color. They don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can learn. And I'm just very disappointed that action has not started or is happening, and you're continuing to debate and delay. So thank you.
Thank you for speaking.
Stacey TA, 10 Clocks Lane. First, Dr. Adley, I want to thank you for defending the strategic plan. I'm very proud of the work that we did on that committee, and I'm proud of the board's support for it. Dr. Adley, as you put the final touches of your budget together, I ask that you put together a budget that prioritizes meeting the needs of our students. Do not let any outside pressure from elected officials that do not understand what is going on in our schools and what our students and our staffs face every day impact your judgment. Listen to your staff, your cabinet, your department heads, and your principals, and make your judgment based on that. Mr. Deneen, as we enter the budget season, I ask you to protect and defend the Board of Ed's authority and the process as I know you can. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. Are we good in person? We'll move to Zoom, Michelle.
If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participant's icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. The facilitator will identify you and announce that you're unmuted for public comment. Please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Connor Godfrey, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hello. Second. So I'll be brief, and I would like to say that I do believe Mr. Brown got it right, and that there are many people in town that have an issue with the strategic plan. But I'd actually like to comment on Mr. Tranberg's description of the DEI initiative, and also as it pertains to Mr. Shelton. You said a couple of different things, when you're doing equity work and an equity audit, and frankly, I have a real problem with this terminology, okay? Equity is not equality. Okay, we should strive for equality because that promotes fair opportunity. Equity indicates a guarantee of result. It's a Marxist construct and represents the opposite of the founding principles of this country. In the US, we have the right to pursue happiness. We're not guaranteed anything other than life and liberty. Rewriting history isn't going to solve the ills of the downtrodden. Mr. Shelton refers to the grading system as racist and capitalist. Capitalism, it's said, is the unequal sharing of prosperity. Communism, the equal sharing of misery. I feel that Ken's presence in our educational system and his DEI initiatives are proof in themselves that the end goals are Marxist in nature and destructive by design. It's Marxism masquerading as tolerance, and I, for one, am not in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking.
Doreen Godfrey, you are unmuted and recognized.
Doreen, can you hear us, Doreen?
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for listening today. I am at 1 Red Mill Lane. I have 3 children in the school district, 2 in elementary, 1 in the middle school. I just want to start by saying I was not raised in Darien, Connecticut. I'm from Queens, New York, and where I went to school, I was the minority. I took public city buses to school, and the things that I saw on buses and in bathrooms in schools that I went to pale in comparison to what we are seeing here. But when I did have questions, I went home and I asked my mother, when did it stop becoming our job as parents to educate our children, to expose our children to diversity? I moved here to Darian with my husband, who's also from Queens, because of the incredible reputation that the schools had here, and we fell in love with this community. I knew it was my job and our job as parents to expose them to the world, to educate them on diversity, and to teach them to be loving and understanding people in this world. But we also stress that hard work and determination help you reach your goals. It's not expected, it's earned. I don't believe that this aligns with what I've seen and heard through Mr. Shelton. We also are teaching our kids the importance of social media and how it could affect us in getting jobs, and how we should be careful of what we put out there. And that is something that I stress to my girls. That's something that, like Miss Tara said, we can't speak on both sides of our mouth here. You can't say it's okay for somebody to get one job, but what they're putting out on social media to represent them and what we see as a representation of them does not align with what I would want to teach my child. As parents, we are responsible. If you need to educate us so we can educate our children, there are children, just like that mother said, don't represent my child's voice. You haven't spoken to my daughter. Let me speak to my children, and you speak to your children. If your child sees something on a bus and comes home, you should be talking to them about it, not running to Mr. Adley, who I love and I've always been in such support of. I love this Board of Education. I've served on a PTO. I love this community, but we should be doing the work. We should educate us on how to speak to our children about this, but it's not your job. Your job is educators, and you do a great one of it. Teach our children what they need to know in the schools, and let us have the conversations at home for our children. And I don't believe that what Ken Shelton is putting out there and what I see he represents is what I want to teach my child. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking.
Peter McGinnis, you are unmuted and recognized.
Mr. McGinnis, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thank you so much. And I could not have said anything better than the Godfreys have just said. So I'd like to turn to another topic, which is open choice, and specifically Section 10-266 AA of the Connecticut General Statutes. As I understood the proposal or discussion, maybe it's not a proposal at this point, but as we enter the budget season, as we think about adding 20 students from the Norwalk system to the Darien system, I just want to make the board aware that this provision is really intended to be a provision to allow suburban communities to take in students from more urbanized communities locally. And that's because the suburban communities have a shortfall in terms of students. Two things. One is, I don't think we're going to have a shortfall of students as we project the new development that's happening in town. That's a very important fact I think that the board and the administration needs to consider. The second thing is, if we take in 20 students at the kindergarten level, what do we do next year? The kindergartners become first graders. We bring in a new set of 20 students, and so on, where we get a capacity of 260 students. 260 students, and we take $3,000 per student from the state, and those students cost us, let's assume, $23,000, not inflation adjusted. So we have a difference of $20,000 per student times 260 students over the entire life of the program. That's $5.2 million. The other thing too That's a $5.2 million commitment that this system would be stuck with because we're not allowed to take those students and return them back to the Norwalk system. So in terms of budgeting and planning, I'm asking the administration to give this a present value cost of the entire program as it runs its way through our system. Not a 20-person count, but a 260-person count going into the future. You can discount it at present value, but let's be honest in the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you again for speaking.
Krista Carnes. Oops. Krista Carnes, you are unmuted and recognized.
Krista, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Great, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Krista Carnes. I'm at 40 Fitch Avenue, a very popular street, I guess. I'm just a little gobsmacked here. I really thought we were going to be, I mean, we're talking about Marxism, and yet we're also, there's talk that this is representative of a large part of this community. Mr. Brown mentioned that, these are not reflective of the interests of the majority of the school. Well, my interest is keeping people safe. And I feel like that is, we're whittling this down to an interest group. These are not interest groups. These are creating safe spaces, as Mr. Tranenberg said, which I thought very eloquently and very much in depth and well needed, of what DEI actually is. And if Mr. Deneen said that you guys are driving the bus, right? You're driving the bus here. But if that bus is making all kinds of scary noises and everybody ignores them, you become not only a danger to the people in the bus, but it becomes a danger to the people in the streets. And that's where we're at. So if someone like Mr. Shelton, who has experience putting on different lenses, and if you've read some of his other blog posts, he talks about everything from microscopes to telescopes to magnifying glasses. There's so many ways we can look at what we're doing. And maybe not all of it's so bad. And maybe not all of it is going to apply. But if he can find those areas and pinpoint what we need to fix to make people safer, and so that everybody is enjoying the ride, then I say go for it. Because I don't think there's anybody that's going to please this board and some of the people in town. And I'm also a little offended by the fact that there are people talking out both sides of their mouths, and they're talking about picking Choose Love and other SEL programming, which I don't think on its face is a bad thing, but that's not an apples to apples comparison of what DEI is meant to uncover, address, make recommendations, and then you as a board will help determine what steps we take. He's not here forever. He's just a first step, hopefully, in a long process of identifying what we need to do as a community. And to whittle him down and cancel him for for opinions that he's had about a range of issues, because I'm sure if we all sat in a room together, I love a lot of you guys that just spoke that I completely disagree with. Does that mean I'm not going to frequent your business? Does that mean that I'm not going to want to talk to you at the next football game or whatever? No, because it is about dialogue. And if we really want to have a community conversation, then let's have it. Let's have a forum. Let the Board of Education pull the people together, because saying, oops, we started to pay attention isn't good enough, because it has been, the work has been being done. And now that it's—
You are at time, Krista.
Thank you.
But thank you very much for speaking.
Laura Pesky Gray, you are unmuted and recognized.
Laura, can you hear us? You look like you're muted, Laura. There you
Can
go.
you hear me? Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Mr. Worm had stated, I think that there's a disconnect between the strategic plan and the way, I don't think anybody thinks the strategic plan, it's beautifully written, it looks amazing, but the execution of how we're going to get there is really so vague and unclear, and I think it's making the community very uneasy. I'm curious to understand that if we've paid Ken Shelton for 2 on-sites and some virtual visits, why is the extra money needed for these like additional visits in an effort to get to where are we getting to that the current money isn't going to cover. Also, somebody asked about how the selection for the leadership form when it comes to students was done. My son actually had filled out a questionnaire that wasn't very detailed. It was basically during a flex period. He was asked if he wanted to be part of a leadership forum. And it didn't explain that he was being pulled out of 2 classes that he had to figure out how to make up that work, which was social studies and Spanish. He was not clear on what he was getting involved in. And I just feel like the selection process for students, I would imagine, would be a range of diversity, right? Because that's the whole purpose of how do the diverse students feel about our community, correct? So I feel like the process of sending a questionnaire out to all students in the school, you're not really getting the exact pool of people that really have a voice and want to explain what the norms are and how they feel in the school. Do they feel welcome? And lastly, Jill brought up a really great point about transparency and cultural responsiveness. I don't feel that that's happening. And I think that I would feel more comfortable if things were more transparent and clear. And I understand and really appreciate her trying to get clarity on those things. I'm still not feeling clear on that. And lastly,
You're almost at time, Laura.
that's it. Thank you so much for listening and hearing me again. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. Have a good evening.
There are no raised hands at this time.
Great. Thank you all that participated in public comment. Again, on behalf of the board, happy holidays to everyone. And a big thank you again for our teachers and staff for all they've done to get us to the holidays. Everyone, please be safe and enjoy the holidays and happy holidays. We have a motion to adjourn. Mr. Sini, second by Mrs. Best. All those in favor, Jill, that is unanimous. Thank you.